We will defend these police officers.
Listen to police officers' commands, listen to what we tell you, and just stop. The nation needs to realize that when we tell you to do something, do it. And if you're wrong, you're wrong. If you're right, then the courts will figure it out.
We don't get to take the law, we enforce it. But at the end of the day, each and every member should go home safe. Sometimes the use of force is necessary. You need to comply with the police officer, the way the system was meant to be. Comply with the orders of police officers. Resisting arrest is a real and dangerous crime.
Nonpartisan Liberty for All. I'm your host, Dave Bourne, and it is April 28th, 2016, and we are coming to you live from Las Vegas, Nevada. Thank you for tuning in to Nonpartisan Liberty for All. We're on weeknights, Tuesday through Thursday at 7 o'clock Pacific, 10 o'clock Eastern. And you can listen live on Spreaker.com and nonpartisanlibertyforall.com and to the archives immediately following the show on Spreaker, YouTube, Twitter, Tumblr, and SoundCloud, as well as by the next day on Stitcher. On Nonpartisan Liberty for All, we promote the ideas of true freedom and liberty and self-ownership, meaning being able to do whatever you want as long as you respect the freedom of others and don't directly interfere with their freedom. Exposing government for what it is, a mafia based on extortion that rules without consent by threat of force and violence. And if that's the first time for you hearing that, of course, you might be somebody who is in total denial or thinks it's a bunch of bullshit. But the truth is, it is the reality. Look up extortion in the dictionary and try not paying your property taxes, and you'll see what happens real quick. We're happy to hear from you, and you can reach us via phone at 702-470-7664. That's 702-470-7664. Or via Skype. Our Skype name is Nonpartisan Liberty for All. It's all one word. And you can find all that information and check us out at nonpartisanlibertyforall.com, which also links to our Facebook pages and other social media info, as well as contact information, archives, original articles, and more. And tonight, we again have a special co-host, Katie Reyes, who is also our voiceover girl, is joining us again tonight.
Hello, everyone.
Thank you, Katie, for joining us. Of course, it's a pleasure to have you in the studio.
Thank you for having me.
So tonight we're going to talk all about traditional families and the interference of the government in the destruction of traditional families in certain ways, along with other things related to families in general. There are, of course, now so many different types of families, and personally I don't judge anybody regardless of how their family is structured, although I believe more in traditional. We're also going to talk about gender roles within the family, and I believe in freedom to do what you want personally. And that means being that you have the freedom to do whatever you want and the government should not interfere. And I don't really judge anybody for what they do. It's their life. It's their right to do it. But when it comes to my own life, and this is, I guess, kind of my precursor to all this, that I believe more in traditional gender roles within the family, and I believe more in a traditional type family to an extent. I guess it depends on how you look at it. So I'd say more in the gender roles as opposed to a traditional family, because we talked about last week all about raising kids and my thoughts on that, where I believe in giving kids freedom. And I don't think that would be considered traditional at all. But when it comes to things like relationships, marriage, and things like that, I think I'm more traditional, as well as gender roles. But again, when it comes to other people's lives, I believe that it's their right to live their lives how they choose. And I don't believe in any mandates of the government. As I said, it's all up to the individual. And if you don't believe in the gender roles or how I believe when it comes to the family, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. I think that you should be able to choose your own life because it is your life. And I wouldn't want somebody to live a certain life, which has happened throughout the years, especially with gay people, where they've gotten married to women, speaking of guys, and they did it because of their parents or pressure by society. And that not only hurts them, it hurts the women they marry, the children, and it's just bad all around. So I'd rather somebody just be who they are, and I have no problem with that whatsoever. So when we're talking about a lot of the different subjects today, a lot of them, there's the difference that I want people to recognize. There's a difference between an opinion of how I look at my personal life and how I want to live it, and then the right for other people to choose their life and respecting the way they live their life as long as it doesn't directly affect me, meaning, they don't attack me or force things on my family or anything like that. Of course, the people that force laws upon me by the threat of force and guns are the people that bother me. So before we get to talking about traditional families and gender roles, there are two articles I came across, and I think, Katie, these will be interesting to you. And for those who don't know, Katie and I are a couple. A couple of what? I have no idea. But there was a article regarding DNA and couple compatibility, and this is really the one I wanted to talk about. The other one actually has to do with families. But there was an article I came across that claims that they can determine compatibility via DNA. So what are your thoughts about that, Katie? And what would be, if we had a test, let's assume that there's some validity to this. Now, how you can prove it, I don't know, because you really can't. Even if people were together their whole lives, you can't really prove it. I mean, maybe they just get along. Maybe there's no in love there. Maybe, I don't know. But they say, I guess, compatibility. What that exactly means, I guess, is up for debate. But what do you think of that? And do you think that's possible? And what would you do, or what would you think if it came out that we were not compatible via DNA?
Well, do they mean compatible via DNA, meaning, for example, if we would have healthy children or not? Because I know a lot of people have like genetic histories of illnesses, or, if they take the DNA from two adults, and it would most likely that their child would have some kind of like syndrome or disease or some kind of condition. Like I've heard of that. I've heard of like married couples, they go and they get tested to see if they're, I guess, in a sense, compatible to have children.
No, this has nothing to do with that. It's if you're compatible with that person. So it's a pretty short article. Let me read the article for everybody because it is pretty short. So when it comes to this is from CBS New York. When it comes to relationships, there's no perfect formula to tell if that certain someone is Mr. or Mrs. Right until now. There may be some real science behind the chemistry of love with DNA matchmaking. And I could just see this becoming like a business where people go in and they give their DNA like morons. And then, of course, it goes to the government. And then they match them with somebody else by DNA. And I would see it as a CIA front, really, just to collect people's DNA. But there might be some real science behind the chemistry of love with DNA matchmaking. CBS 2's Christine Johnson spoke to two couples, one who has been together happily for decades and another newly engaged couple. We knew fairly early we had something special, Chelsea Furringer said. Chelsea and Brian Hudson were introduced through friends. Max and Donna Futer, I can't pronounce last names for shit, I guess, met in high school and married 7 years later. It was 32 years in July for the couple. What makes these couples work and what makes any couple work? There may be a scientific answer. DNA testing companies claim they can tell how compatible you are with your mate. It's as simple as putting some saliva into a test tube and sending it to be analyzed. That's just how they test DNA. If it comes back as incompatible, the wedding's off, Brian joked. It's not funny. He's kidding, of course, but that little bit of spit holds a ton of information. The test can measure things like serotonin, dopamine, and oxytocin. They can be indicators of how you might react to emotional situations, if you're impulsive, and your ability to deal with stress. Some experts say that it's still the basic romantic connection that makes couples work, and I would probably agree more with that. A lot of people have to have common interest. You have to have compatibility in your personality, so I guess it goes much more than DNA testing, Jeanette Fraser said. In these cases, though, the results brought good news for the couples. That's probably why we've been together for so long, Donna Future said. And for Chelsea and Brian, the wedding is on. He wants to frame the 77 compatible certificate that we got, Chelsea said. Some of the DNA testing sites offer dating services to find and set you up with your supposed perfect match. Like I was saying at the beginning, prices for DNA couples analysis start at about $149. What people will do for money, or what people will do to start a business for money. So they're really saying that by testing your DNA, so they can get that from your saliva, that they can predict compatibility, whether you'd be compatible with somebody. So what if we got a DNA test for compatibility and it came back that we're not compatible? Would you give what would be your thoughts? Would you even have a second thought or give any validity to that test? I mean, this is a short article. It doesn't go into the details, but yes, I guess from your DNA, there's certain things that they can get, but at the same time, it's the nature versus nurture argument where your environment, also the way you're brought up, the people you're around, that combined with your DNA is what makes you into the person you are. And DNA doesn't speak for chemistry that you may have with somebody. So you would just not really give it any thought if...
I don't know. Why don't we do one and we'll see? I'll be able to tell you.
Well, I honestly think, it's $150. I honestly think that to be honest, it may be a front for the fucking CIA, because they have a lot of front companies, and I'm not kidding. They're starting to collect DNA from people now. There's a DNA database for certain felonies, they can do it. The police do it all the time now. And the Supreme Court even ruled for certain misdemeanors, they can take your DNA, put it in a DNA database, and then use it where if they find your DNA at a crime scene, they run it through a computer and see if it comes up. And that's some scary shit.
But, okay, if that's the case, is this a private company? Because don't they have a right to protect their clients? And wouldn't anyone who would have this test done, read into that? What is my DNA going to be further used for? I mean, you'd have to be an idiot to agree to this if there wasn't some kind of privacy protection.
There is, but there is with a lot of things, and they violate it because the government gets a court order or their CIA fronts. I mean, how essentially the government can do whatever the fuck they want to do, and that's just bottom line. So if the government wanted to get the DNA of all these samples, I'm sure they could. Now, I don't know that that's the case. I'm just speculating, but it wouldn't surprise me. We'll just put it that way. But anyway, I thought that was just an interesting little article. So I wanted to look at that. There was one other article that I wanted to mention, and we can go into detail later in the show about it, is that 5 million kids have parents that are incarcerated, that are in jail, which is a lot of kids. Now, of course, the United States has the highest prison population in the world. I believe the United States makes up 5% of the world's population and 25% of the world's jail population, because there's just a jail culture. How many times have you heard somebody say, they should go to jail, or we need a law for this, or, all that ridiculous shit. So we'll get to that when we get to that point about single parents. But I first want to talk about traditional families, meaning I would consider, well, first of all, what would you consider a traditional family? What would be your definition of a traditional family?
I suppose my definition of a traditional family would be a man and a woman who first get married, then have children. It really doesn't matter whether, both parents work or one parent works, as long as they are together. I guess it doesn't even matter if the parents are married, just as long as they're together and committed and somehow both contribute to the household, whether that be both of them work and both of them cook and clean or do some kind of repairs or contribute in some way, or one parent works, one parent stays home, but they somehow manage to both maintain the household. I guess my sense of a traditional family, as long as the couple is together and holding the household together.
See, I would also, I would see a traditional family also as a family that had one parent that stayed home. And this is what I believe, and then I want to hear your thoughts on this. But I think that no matter what, that there should be one parent that stays home. Now, I don't necessarily, when people think of traditional families like from the 50s and shit, they think of the woman stays home and watches the kids and cook, and the guy goes to work and pays the bills and that whole thing. And I believe in those roles, to be honest, and I'm more of, in general, I would say that depending on who makes more money would be the person to stay home. But I do kind of believe in for myself personally, not for, again, whatever other people want to do is what they want to do. But I wouldn't have a problem staying home as long as my wife made more money. But I still kind of believe, I guess, in those more traditional, the wife is the one who, if you have kids, now if you don't have kids, it's a whole nother story. But if you have kids, that the woman stays home and takes care of the kids and takes care of the house and all of that. Now, if she has a career that pays more and is more important than the man's career, and personally, I wouldn't have a problem with that neither. If I stayed home and say we had kids and we're married and you say you were a doctor and you made a lot of money, and that would be a bad job though, because you'd probably never be home. But point being that I think when it comes to any type of family, that there should be one parent that's home until at least the kids are old enough to stay home by themselves, like teenage years. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, to the doctor thing, I don't think that, I think doctors can come home because...
Not you being a doctor, but your thoughts on that one parent, when people have kids, that they should think about the fact that, I mean, I don't believe, and you already know, and we've talked about this, and I don't want to get too much into it, the schooling part, that I think kids should be homeschooled, so obviously a parent should be home. But I think anybody who has kids, I don't think they should have government babysitting. Or even if you're rich and you get a nanny, maybe if you got a nanny for help, if you had, depending on how many kids you had. I mean, if you had, some people have like fucking 6 or 7 kids. I think that's insane. But if you needed help or something like that, or you had triplets, okay, fine, I understand that part of it. But I think that before you have kids, that you should plan for one parent to stay home until they're teenagers. And I think obviously what happens now compared to, and we'll talk about a little about history, but you can't even do this anymore. I mean, most people that have kids, they can't afford to have one parent stay home, and they can barely make it when it comes to that. But if people that couldn't stay home, at least one parent stay home, probably there'd be no more kids, because nobody could afford to have kids.
Well, I mean, you could, but the home wouldn't be able to afford a lot of things that, people want these days, such as electronics and all these extra amenities. If you were satisfied with just, living with the minimum, I think it'd be fine. I have a friend who, she lost her job, and her and her husband have twin boys, and I have no idea what his salary is, but they make it. She's a stay-at-home mom, by choice. She didn't bother to, look for another job after she lost her other job. And they seem to be fine. The only thing she doesn't like is not having the independence of being able to, get the things that she would like for herself. She told me that she hates having to go to her husband, for money for to get a manicure and her, eyebrows waxed or haircut or clothes. Maybe for her it's a pride thing, but, I'm sure if they're capable, he doesn't mind getting her those things. So I think it really depends on the couple and what they're okay with, using their means for.
But I'm sure it's got to be hard for them to compare to when they both were working And now only one of them is that things have changed a lot financially for them.
It's even when I talk to her, she hardly ever mentions the financial part. Really, she mentions she wants, her husband to be more involved with the children, spending quality time with them. Her biggest issue is, of course, he's tired, from being at work all day, but, she's tired from taking care of the children all day. And all she wants is for him to spend quality time with them, even if it's him being the one to give them their bath or sit down with them and have dinner or go outside with them and play. And she feels, like sometimes he doesn't contribute, or does
like neglected or
yeah, like the boys are neglected, not her, So it's like if you're gonna agree to that situation, you have to be totally, in agreement to how you're gonna run things. Like, for example, I have told you, my biggest fear is I'm gonna be a stay-at-home mom with the children all day, and you come home and you're gonna tell me, oh, I'm tired, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do that, I don't want to help out or do my part. You're gonna want to do other things, and I'm gonna be left behind, doing everything, making dinner, cleaning everything, trying to spend quality time with the children, and meanwhile I'm exhausted, I'm tired from work, I was at work all day, and well, what about me? Just because I don't work doesn't mean that I don't work.
Well, it depends on the age of the kids too. It's harder at certain ages. I mean, when they're infants, I'm sure, the crying and all that shit and getting up, I'm sure it is hard, but it's not really hard. Like, what do you have to do besides feed them?
Have you ever taken care of an infant?
No, I'm just.
Have you ever
just asking?
Have you ever been around children?
Have you taken care of an infant?
I have.
And how was it?
It can be exhausting. You have to watch them constantly. They'll cry.
Well, they sleep a lot of the day, though.
It really depends on the child. If you're lucky, you'll get a child that doesn't cry, that just sleeps there. But some people,
right,
they have children that cry constantly, or you're up all day, the child is asleep, all day, but you're up all day doing your thing. But then come nighttime, the child's up in the middle of the night crying and crying, and you're up with them, trying to figure out how to get them to stop crying. So, it really depends on the child. I've heard it never fails, no matter what parent I talk to. They say it's, hard work to have a child.
Well, I'm sure it's a lot of hard work, and especially you have parents that both of them work, and we'll get to that later in the show. But you had the 50s and 60s where essentially, which I do think were unfair, at least from what I hear, is, the man basically didn't have a lot to do with the kids as far as taking care of them during the week, and he would come home and expect dinner and the house clean and the kids taken care of and all of that. So I assume you obviously disagree with how things went on back then.
I don't disagree whatsoever, because my grandparents on my mother's side, well, I'm pretty sure both, grandparents on each parent's side, but I hear more stories about my mother's mother. My mother did everything. She did the cooking, she did the cleaning, while my grandfather worked. And, even my own mother, she moved out of her household. She didn't know how to do anything. She never ironed. She never washed clothes. She never made a meal in her life. And all of a sudden, she found herself being forced because, she got pregnant with me. And because her mother didn't, want to look bad, she didn't want my mom to shame the family. First she tried to get my mother to marry my dad, but my mom didn't want to get married. So she ended up getting forced to move in with my father and his mom. Mind you, they were already older. They must have been like 23, 24 years old.
Well, that's not that old.
Well, back then it wasn't old. Now that's old, considering people have children at freaking 15, 16 years old. Yeah, 23, 24 is old to have kids.
Well, I mean, I'm saying 23 and 24 is not, I consider that young. When you're that age, you're still pretty young.
Yeah, that's true. But no, all I'm saying is, my grandmother was that traditional, wife that did all the home stuff. And, my grandfather worked, he paid,
So what do you think of that, though? So you think that was okay? Or
yeah. I mean, honestly, it doesn't matter. Honestly, I don't think it's okay. I don't think it's not okay. It doesn't matter how you choose to live your home. However, the couple, what they think is okay is okay. No one situation is better or worse than the other. It's what you want it to be. Now, if that's what you want it to be, one parent stays home while the other one works and, is a breadwinner and is able to take care of everything, great. But hey, if both parents want to work and hire a nanny or a sitter, that's up to them, as long as it works for the family.
But I think if you have somebody that's one person that's working and the other one's staying home, that there's still certain things that if you're staying home taking care of the kids, that you should also take care of the house and cook as well, as you're getting all of your bills taken care of. So you should be contributing in that sense also.
What if the parent that's staying home doesn't know how to cook? There's some people
they
who
better
can't
learn.
There's some people who can't boil water.
They better take a cooking class, I guess.
Is their spouse going to pay for that?
Well, I guess they'd have to figure that out. But
that's the thing, though. Cooking is like an interest. It's a capability. Not just anyone can cook. I mean, but see, that would at the same time, that would depend on the couple. Obviously, for example, you would like to have a spouse, that can cook, and you have me, and I enjoy cooking. I take, pride in my meal and how it's prepared and that it tastes good. But would you still want me to take care of those kinds of things? What if I didn't enjoy cooking? What if I was a horrible cook, even though I tried?
Well, I am. I mean, I lived by myself for years and made my own food, and it was fine for me. I made steak and chicken, and it didn't come out very good, but it was good enough for me. So
you would be okay having a spouse that would cook but burn the food.
No, I would probably just make my own food.
There you go. Well,
for myself, but I'm assuming that they, looking at it from the standpoint that they can cook and that they can clean and all of that stuff. But now things are starting to change a lot, where I think that if a woman wants to go and have a career and that's what she wants to do, then I have no problem with that, and that's what she would do. That's what she should do. But if she wants to have kids, and unless she can find a husband who wants to be a stay-at-home husband, then she should learn to cook and clean and take care of the house. Because if you have, and it goes both ways. I mean, if a husband's a stay-at-home husband, he should be cleaning the house and cooking and all of those things. And of course, you help each other as well when you can. But the majority of the responsibility, I think, should land on the person that's not working, because they would be the one who would have the most time. So either way, I think that whoever's the stay-at-home person, but again, I don't think that it should necessarily be the woman, but if it is, I think they should be able to take care of the house and cook and clean. And I still kind of believe in that more traditional role. I don't think all women, and again, that's just for me. And I want to be clear on that women that don't want to have kids or want to find a stay-at-home dad, I think that's great for them. If they want to have a career and don't want to have kids at all, or not get married, or just get married but not have kids, I think that's fine, and there's no problem with that. I think you should do whatever makes you happy, and that's their life, and I could care less. I'm just saying, personally, for me, I don't want a woman, I don't think I'd want to marry a woman who is a big career-oriented person. And you have already said to me before that you believe that the man should take care of all the financial responsibilities anyway.
I did say that.
Are you, was that a question, or are you?
No, but I was raised that, the man takes care of everything, even if the woman works. Now, you don't agree. You don't feel the same way. Well,
if the woman works, then, if she takes care of the kids while she's working, then, I don't necessarily think that the man should take care of everything. But I mean, in our situation, I take care of more financially than you do. And I have since we've been together, and we're not married, but I take care of more of the financial responsibilities than you do. So, yeah. If you weren't working, obviously I'd be taking care of all of them, but I don't, I guess if I was, I look at it more of I wouldn't want a woman to take advantage of me. That's what I would worry about. So if I didn't have any kids and I was married and I had enough money where my wife didn't have to work, that wouldn't necessarily be a problem. But what is she going to do all day? And is she taking advantage of me? And if I didn't have any money, she would leave. I mean, I'm not saying that she would. I'm just saying I'd be worried about the being used part of it, I guess.
What are you afraid of being used?
Well, I'm saying that if you're paying for everything and they're not paying for anything, they're not working, and you don't have kids, you look at, well, maybe this person is just using me, and if I run out of money, then they're gone.
Well, I suppose that's a risk you're going to have to take. There's no, life has no guarantees. But see, that would show in their personality, because
it probably would.
If they would do things, okay, you know what, he's a breadwinner, he's taking care of everything financially. Obviously, that partner that was the one that would stay home, that wouldn't contribute financially, they would contribute in other ways. Now, let's say, because I've
sex
talked
parties.
No, I've talked to some couples where, for example, this is how some couples work. And I know you would never go for this because you're like a control freak, but there are some couples where, for example, the man works, he makes the money, but the wife takes on the responsibility of, for example, paying all the bills, because they have a joint checking because they're a married couple. So the means belong to the both of them. So the man has a job, but the woman, she makes sure all the bills get paid. all the groceries,
Well, I wouldn't not do that because I'm a control freak. I would not do that because I used to do accounting and I have more of a knack for doing those type of things. Plus, you procrastinate and the bills probably wouldn't get paid.
Well, see, that's my point. Like, that's us as a couple, because that's my personality. I'm a procrastinator. But I'm just saying, some couples, the man, makes the money,
Right.
and the woman takes on the wife.
Well, my parents did that, even though my mother had a job, but my father made more money. But she, at one point, took the bills over.
Yeah, so
and,
made
sure they got paid.
Just taking on that role of the partner that doesn't work for financial means, but they do work in other aspects. And it's not just about keeping the home clean and making dinner. It's other things. It's the home is run, like doing the grocery shopping, paying the bills, buying the amenities, household products. Making sure everything is, running in an order. Now, what about families where, yes, the man is the breadwinner, but is he equipped to repair the home himself? And if not, okay, obviously he would pay to have someone, do maintenance. But I grew up in a household.
I can learn anything.
I grew up in a household where my father mowed the lawn. My father, fixed the air conditioner and the plumbing.
That's what he did as a
mechanics.
job too,
Yeah.
though. I mean,
no, he
did
mounted
like construction
drywall.
stuff.
He mounted drywall.
Right.
All that other stuff he learned on his own.
Right, but a lot of it was related to he'd do jobs like that and stuff. I'm not saying
my
that
father wasn't a plumber, but he could do plumbing.
Well, I can unclog a toilet.
My father wasn't a mechanic, but at the same time, he knew mechanics on old school cars. If it was an electrical car, he'd recommend anyone to take it to the dealership.
Could he run a radio show?
I don't think that was his interest.
See, I have a different skill set. I can fix like electronics and stuff like that, and I have a different skill set, I guess. And I wish I could do more to fix around the house and those type of things, especially when we get our own house. I just want to go over some of the positive, I think, effects of having one of the parents stay home. Of course, for me, you can homeschool, which I think is a positive thing, and no more government babysitting. And hopefully, if everybody did this, you could eliminate government schools. But you get to spend more time with your kids as opposed to just dropping them off with strangers, and then have more time to cook and take care of the house. On the negative side, a lot of people now look down on women that stay home and are quote unquote homemakers. And Barack Obama made a statement that women should not have the choice whether to stay home and take care of the children. They should be working.
They should not have the choice whether they want to stay home. That's ridiculous.
No, he said they should be working, that they should not have the choice to stay home. Well,
did he mean like, so have that makes no sense.
That they should have to work. They should be in the workforce so they could collect more. He didn't say this part, but so they could collect more taxes off them, and that they could get the children into government schools and brainwash them more. He didn't say that part of it. Well, no, he didn't say that part of it, but he said...
Did he get ridiculed for this?
I
mean, it's up to the family.
That's where I heard it, where they
ridiculed him. If a married couple, with one of the spouses wants to work and be the breadwinner, and the other spouse stays home and takes care of their kids, that should freely be their choice. There's nothing wrong with that.
Well, he didn't say that there should be a law, But that's what I'm saying, where the government are really the ones who tried to destroy the family, where they wanted to get women to work, and they were behind certain waves of the feminist movement because it was better for them if women were working. They were collecting more taxes, plus they got more control over the next generation. So I want to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk briefly about divorce, and then I want to get into two-parent working families. We'll also talk about one-parent households, including people on government assistance, and why people on government assistance, if they're home all day, why aren't they homeschooling? And we'll talk about that and more. If you'd like to call in, 702-470-7664, 702-470-7664. And you can Skype in as well, username Nonpartisan Liberty for All. And we will be right back after this with our co-host, Katie Reyes. And check us out at nonpartisanlibertyforall.com. And we'll be right back.
The 1950s. Known for its greaser styles, doo-wop music, and breakthrough advertising techniques, the 50s have remained memorable decades after its passing. Its styles and morals have continued to be an inspiration and find admiration even in today's life. The 2000s. Technicolor, technological, techno, you name it. The 2000s completely remastered modern living. iPhones, emails, Jason Derulo. With such drastic differences, how could the 1950s and the 2000s be even remotely the same? Taking a closer look into gender roles, familial structures, and social norms, we discover the similarities and differences between these two eras. We like to call the 50s the simpler times. Romanticizing the past is fun and all, but if you look at some of the ideas of the time, the 50s may be better off referred to as the simple-minded times. Gender roles, for example, were extremely limiting. Men were claimed as the alphas. They made the decisions, they went to college, they ran the businesses, they brought home the bacon. Meanwhile, women were handed the submissive end of the stick, being expected to stay home, cook, clean, and watch the children. Their highest option for education was attending finishing school, and even then, marriage was still pushed onto them to be their one true aspiration. Women who wanted more for themselves were claimed to be crazy. Perhaps not the wisest thing to say to those who handled the household knives. Jumping to today's time, women have more options than ever. College is not only available for everyone now, it's insisted. Women can hold jobs of high power and can have further aspirations than motherhood or wifely duties. In fact, many households are now dual income as women branch out into the workforce. However, as much progress as the 2000s have made, the 50s sexism has still found a way to stick around. Though women have more options for jobs, their pay is still 23% less than that of men's, even when they perform the same amount of work for the same amount of hours. Furthermore, women only make up 15% of the Fortune 500 CEOs. So while many accomplishments have been made for women in the workforce, we still have ways to go. The 1950s family life was white picket fence perfection. It consisted of a daily routine of dad leaving for work while mom got the kids ready for school, cleaned the house, and began dinner. By the time dad came home, dinner was on the table, and the family would sit down and enjoy conversation with each other. Men, again, were the alphas, and were seen as the head of the household. They ran the family checkbook and made decisions for the family. Though women basically kept the house afloat, they were seen as substandard to their husbands. Sons were expected to follow in their father's footsteps of one day becoming successful businessmen with a lovely doting wife, while daughters were brought up learning how to one day be that perfect wife. Today, families can be incredibly diverse. Instead of just finding heterosexual couples, you can find single parents, step-parents, and gay couples all living their lives as families. More interracial couples are prevalent now, something that was once taboo in the 50s. Income provider role isn't set on one person, with many different variations available, and children of either sex are taught to want success in life, not just a marriage. Family lives overall these days lead to more open-minded, ambitious generations. The 50s are probably most idolized for how they ran their social lives. The 50s are known for their time of drive-in movie dates and their swell way of speaking. Physical affection during this time is always portrayed as very conservative. Most couples even slept in separate beds. For high schoolers then, with communication means not quite so vast yet, speaking to friends meant meeting down at the soda parlor or dancing while the jukebox played. These dances have become a trademark style of this era. Insert the selfie generation. With iPhones and the internet kicking off in the new millennium, new ways to communicate were invented faster than you could post a selfie. No longer limited to just phone calls, new forms of communication included texting, instant messaging, social media sites, and web calls. Now, reaching your friends is just a send button away. New slang was developed among these times as well, including a variety of interesting new acronyms and phrases. We've come a long way since the 50s, and many things have improved for the better. Gender roles have opened up, familial settings have become more diverse, and social norms are adapting to this crazy, technology-driven life. Just think of what'll have changed in the next 60 years.
California State Senator Mark Leno is attempting to pass legislation that would allow children to have more than two parents. He is basically saying that we live in a world today where courts face diverse circumstances that have reshaped California families. This legislation gives courts the flexibility to protect the best interests of a child who is being supported financially and emotionally by those parents. It is critical that judges have the ability to recognize the roles of all parents, especially when a family is in distress and a child's security is a concern. So basically, he's arguing that not every family is the same. Parents divorce and then they remarry, and essentially that child might have four parents in that case, right? So should the step-parents have legal say or legal guardianship over that child? Does that make sense? And I think in a lot of cases it does.
I knew it, you libs. You start with a gay marriage. Now everybody's got 28 parents. And then what's next? Okay? What next? You know what's next? I know it. Farm animals.
Oh, God.
Next thing you know, they're going to start having kids.
Conservatives are basically arguing that this is getting rid of the traditional family structure. We're moving further away from that. But I'm going to say something that actually might be controversial, right? Let's focus on the polygamists for a second. Is polygamy really that big of a deal?
Controversy.
I don't think... If consenting...
I knew it. Libs.
No, if consenting adults decide that, like, let's say there's a man, he wants to marry two women, and they're totally in favor of it, and they have children together. What's wrong with that if they agree to do that?
Aha! I knew it. See,
but tell me how that's going to harm society in any way, shape, or form.
Aha! See? No, look, polygamy. Look, it has a downside, right? So I always wondered, the Mormons that used to do it back in the day, no, some, fringe ones still do it. But anyway.
Is incest an issue?
No. I was like, where the hell do all the boys go? Because if you've got like 28 wives and you're one dude, well, where's the 27 other guys? And it turns out they kick them out. So, like, they will, like, take some of the sons and they'll actually just kick them out of the community and let them fend for themselves. It's horrible.
I get it, okay? And that is horrible. But, like, let's say we legalize polygamy in the United States. What are we going to do? Like, throw the men out of the country? Like, go to China? Like, what are we going to do?
Go to Canada? And then they go to Canada, they're like, oh, geez, it's pretty good.
That's true.
All right, anyway. So, I get all those downsides. But nonetheless, I think that if they consent, yeah, I don't think that there is a problem with polygamy. If the two girls or two guys want to marry one girl, have at it, Hawes. I wouldn't go in that direction. But good luck. I mean, Jesus. Imagine having 4 wives. Like in Islam, you're allowed 4 wives.
Why would you want 4 wives?
Oh, jeez. How many times do you have to take out the garbage in a week? Okay. Like, okay, I'm playing. Anyway, so in this case, though, it's not even polygamy. If you got father and you got a stepmother, and they want to be part of your life, I don't even see the problem. Of course they should.
It's kind of incredible that we need legislation to address this. I didn't even think it was a problem. I always assumed that if you are a step-parent, you still have some parental, decision-making. You can play an active role in that child's life, whether it's visiting him or her at the hospital or picking him or her up from school or taking him or her out of class early, whatever it is. But it turns out that, no, that's not the case.
So in the end, they're going to say, aha, you're for more parents. Yeah, I am, if they're his actual parents. I'm not saying go find Bob off the street and make him, Susie's parent for no reason, right? But If there's stepmother and stepfather, yeah, of course, then they should be part of his family. I don't even see the controversy, but, you know.
No controversy.
But, of course, they'll make one. No question.
Nonpartisan Liberty for All. Call in at 702-470-7664 or Skype in. Username Nonpartisan Liberty for All.
Nonpartisan Liberty for All, and we are back. We are here with our co-host, who is also our voiceover girl, who was in that voiceover, who I think has a great voice, especially when we put those voiceovers together, Katie Reyes. Regarding that last clip, I just wanted to say we'll be talking about that later on in the show. And I don't necessarily believe that besides the parents, unless there's adoption that goes on, that any other relatives have any right to those kids, including step parents. But we'll talk about that later in the show. So before we get into two parents and single family households, I wanted to talk about divorce, because I think right now, I believe 50% of marriages end in divorce. You have all of these laws in family court that deal with child custody, alimony, child support, all of these things. And something like what we were just talking about regarding a two-parent household where one of the parents stays home, that I think is more complicated when it comes to alimony. If they get divorced or they separate, you have one person who doesn't have any income because they gave up that income to stay home and take care of the kids and take care of the house. So how do you handle something like that? And that's where things get complicated, because as a, I guess, parent that is working and as the provider, if anything goes wrong, you're kind of fucked, because you're going to end up paying that alimony. And in a way, you should be, because you made an agreement that your wife stay home. And in that circumstance, you don't know really what she would have made if she worked. So you kind of look at it as, well, what if she would have only made $5? Well, not $5, because minimum wage is higher than that. She would have made $10 an hour at McDonald's, or she would have made $100,000 a year. She would have made, say, a little less than whatever you were making. So with divorce and dealing with situations where, like we were just talking about, where the wife stays home, or even the husband, that's where I think alimony should come in. Besides that, it shouldn't come in at all, I don't believe. But women, I think, get a lot of benefits that men don't get, including in divorce. And after divorce, we'll get into some others as well. But in divorce, the women usually always get the house. They always get custody. You got to be real fucked up to not get custody. You got to be like a crackhead. And, you know, I don't know, Katie, if you've had any friends that have been divorced or that have kids that were denied custody in a divorce or in a breakup.
I have never known anybody
that got
I've
divorced.
never known anyone personally that got divorced where the mother didn't have, primary custody.
Right.
Because there's full custody, there's
split. What do
Yeah.
they call it? It's not called split. It's called a joint.
Joint custody. I've heard it's a relative of mine on my mother's side, my mother's cousin's ex-wife. I guess they went to they're pretty strict in Texas, I hear. You know, like you said, on most cases, the mother always gets custody. And I guess my cousin's ex-wife, I guess the judge asked her what was the most important thing that she wanted. And her response was she wanted the house, she wanted the cars, she wanted financial means. And he said,
not the kids.
Yeah, the judge continuously asked, what is the most important thing to you? And she listed everything but the children. And needless to say, the husband got the custody.
And that's a rare case, but it's based on what you said. So usually women always, probably 90-something% of the time, they get custody. If they're staying home taking care of the kids, they get alimony, which I was just discussing that they deserve it. But at the same time, how much do they deserve? Because if they were working, how much money would they be making? Because that's really what they kind of deserve in a way.
Well,
and you don't know that.
No, the whole thing with alimony is it's what do they call it? Lifestyle. Because they're accustomed. Because
Chris
they're
Rock
accustomed.
did a thing on
they're
that.
accustomed to a certain lifestyle, which it goes both ways. Like if the wife makes more money than the husband, or when they get divorced, they get alimony.
No, that's true. Well, some states aren't. It depends on the state.
Yeah.
I know California will give a husband alimony. Some states won't, just because it's unfair. It's they're kind of stereotyping.
And then a lot of times they factor in like the child support. The child support will be more,
right? You have that as well.
Because the child is accustomed to a certain lifestyle.
Well, this accustomed. What happens though a lot of time is the money doesn't go to the fucking kid. I mean, the kid it goes to the mother, and she spends it on shit for herself. I mean, I guess it depends on the person. You can't generalize. Well, you can generalize, but I'm sure there's plenty of women that buy a lot of shit for their kids. But I mean, how expensive are the kids? It's not like.
It's not just about stuff that they buy for the children. It's about, for example, let's say,
the rent.
Yeah, like rent for the house or whatever home, apartment, food put on the table, clothes on their back. Yeah, she works, but honestly, in reality, let's say she gets child support and she works. Basically, bottom line, any penny that she makes from her job, that's hers. Any penny she gets from child support, that's for the child. But it
doesn't really always work that way.
Well, but that's the thing. You can never.
Sometimes they get a lot less. Sometimes there's plenty of women that aren't getting enough in child support or aren't getting any period because they're just not paying them. And I think one of the most ridiculous laws, I mean, of course, I don't think there should be any laws, but is this: they issue warrants for people that don't pay child support and then put them in jail so they can't fucking pay the child support anyway. It's ridiculous.
Well, can I tell you the story from my own relative?
Sure.
I have a relative who has, one of her children, the father of her child, for many years. I think, I want to say, let's say the child was 4 or 5 years old. The father hadn't paid child support. Now, she wouldn't let him see the child until he paid child support. But apparently this guy was like a deadbeat and never had a job, or for some reason or another, didn't pay child support. I think he owed like $9,000, and they were subpoenaed to court, and the child wanted more than anything to see his dad, to know his father, because he saw all the other kids, they had their dad and he didn't have his dad.
Yeah, you're hurting the kid, not the parent.
She was honest with her son and she said, well, you don't get to, or your dad doesn't get to see you because he doesn't pay child support.
But don't you think that's not fair to the kid?
Well, let me finish. So, and you have to remember that, my relative was very, very young, very inexperienced, didn't have anyone to mentor her. She was basically alone. Her mom passed. She never knew her own dad. So you have this person.
So now I know who you're talking about.
But I'm just saying, didn't have the best influences, especially, needless to say, some of, our own relatives weren't the best role models. But okay, so now you have, this mother who's very honest with her child and said, okay, your dad and I, we're going to court. And if I waive, the past child support, he'll, we'll start over. If I don't, then he's going to go to jail. So right before she leaves to go to court, mind you, this kid is like 4 or 5 years old, stops her and says, please don't send my dad to jail. And, her heart sinks. And, when she told me this story, I was so mad. I was like, oh my God. And she's like, I know. So I asked her, well, what did you do? And she said, well, I dropped the charges. I waived all the fees that he'd owed me before.
Well, because if he goes to jail, how is he going to pay her anyway?
So exactly. So finally, you have to remember, at the time when she had her son, she was very young, very naive, very inexperienced.
Right.
Wait a minute.
I know her.
Stop.
Well, the audience doesn't know.
So let's just say, a mother's love for her son. All he wants more than anything in the world is to know his dad. So, she gives, starts over from scratch. Now,
I already know what you're going to say.
Now
I can guess what you're going to say.
Now he pays child support. He gets to see his son and everything is all good.
Oh, I was wrong. I thought you were going to say, so then he ends up not paying and
no,
it doesn't work out. So that was actually a situation where it worked out for the good.
Yes.
But usually it doesn't. In
most cases, I don't want to say most cases because I don't really do my research, but in some cases, yes. It's so sad because you do have families out there where they're married couples. I have, acquaintances and people that I interact with where, for example, I have this one acquaintance, he's divorced. He has, I think his son is like 10. His son is everything to him. And apparently, according to him, the ex-wife badmouths him, to the son, says that he's good for nothing, deadbeat father, which a
lot of women do that.
And I just think that's horrible. Now, first of all, I don't know this woman for Adam. Now, I know, the guy that I am acquainted with, I highly doubt that he's a terrible father. I see it right in front of my eyes. Every time his son calls him, he stops what he's doing and he FaceTimes or whatever with his kid. And when he talks about his son, he lights up and his son is his world, like without a doubt. And I'm imagining like, wow, this ex-spouse of his, to do that to her son, even if he was a deadbeat dad. If I had, let's say, for example, I married a man who was a terrible father. I still wouldn't badmouth him to the child because obviously if they are a terrible child, it will show through and the child will know. There's no reason to do that.
Right. They should be able to decide on their own from their own experiences to decide whether they're a bad father or not. But divorce, like the situation that I was talking about regarding, the woman staying at home and the man working or vice versa, but usually it's the man and it's usually the man who gets screwed. Alimony is going to come into play in that situation. There's no doubt. And I think it should, but how much, I don't know. And people need to think about, that's why having kids is more serious than getting married, because at least if you get married, you can always get divorced and you can go your separate ways. And most likely you're not going to have to pay any money unless you're like a billionaire who marries, some model and, you got to keep her and her lifestyle. And I think that's just bullshit. Chris Rock made that joke that said, well, if you go to a restaurant, you're accustomed to eating. If you leave, you're not eating no more. They don't owe you a steak. So basically saying that if you're with that person who has a lot of money, you benefit from them having a lot of money. But if you leave them and things don't work out, then you don't get that money anymore.
Wait a minute. What if...
I'm talking about if you don't have any kids.
No, I'm saying... What if you're married and the spouse that has the money leaves the spouse that doesn't have the money? The spouse that doesn't have the money didn't fall out of love, didn't choose to leave their spouse. It was the other way around.
Well, it depends on the arrangement that you made. So let's take our situation. We're not married, but we've lived together for a while. So in a couple years, if we're not married, I don't know what the laws are in the state of Nevada, but they might consider it a common law marriage.
There's no common law marriage in Nevada.
That's good. But I'm saying that, would you expect, and of course I would help you out to find a place and everything and maybe give you some money, but would you expect for me to give you monthly payments?
I would not. I would even be surprised if you gave me money to leave.
Oh, well, of course I would make sure that you got a place to stay and all of that stuff. Unless you cheated on me, then I might not. But no, even if you cheated on me, I would make sure that you had a place to stay and all of that. But I don't think I would owe you any money in the situation we're in now. Even if we got married. Now, if we got married and I said, I want you to stay home and take care of the house, then that's a little different. Then that's, okay, you're not working because I'm asking you not to work because I'm telling you I'm going to take care of you. That's a little different. And that's the same thing with kids. So essentially, if we were to get married and have kids and you were to stay home and take care of the kids, and we were ever to get divorced, I'm fucked. I'm living in somebody's basement somewhere because the majority of my money is going to be going to you.
Okay.
Well, I mean, can you
well, there's
come up with a argument that refutes that?
I guess, I mean, I would feel bad, like if you struggled, I would probably compromise. For example, I'm only going to assume that if you and I got married and had children, at some point we would have bought a house. I think it would only be fair if, for example, we would sell the house, split the funds, and I go and I buy my own.
What if the market at the time sucked, so we wouldn't make any money off the house? And then, so there was no option to do that. So I would...
A lot of couples, depending on the situation, if they're, what's the word I'm looking for? Strong enough or, confident enough where they can live, together, in a civil
yeah, but
manner.
You can only do that so long. And I think that we could do that for a certain amount of time, but then, you want to move on with your life and whatnot. So, yeah, I mean, initially, maybe
would you prefer? No, let's talk about this.
Maybe for the first 6 months or a year.
Wait a minute. Let's say for an instance, you and I get married and we have a couple of children. Now, you have asked me to be a stay-at-home mom. Let's say we get divorced. What are my only options? Because I've agreed to be a stay-at-home mother. What if I decided I want to go back to work and I want to go back to work during the day?
Well, that's where you'll have to go back to work because I won't be able to afford two places. So you would have to go back to work. at the same time, I would still have to pay you child support and probably some alimony.
What are we going to do, for instance, with the children? Because you want the children to be homeschooled.
Well, that's where we'd have to figure out, whether I've talked about this, there's people in the community that, there's groups, there's a lot of ways that you can keep your kid out of government school. So we'd have to work around it that way, or, our relatives or whatever.
So you would trust someone else who wasn't a relative to help take care of our children?
Not right away. I'd have to get to know them and see what they're doing. If there was a homeschool group, it would be like sending them to a small school, essentially. So, yeah, I wouldn't just be like, here's my kid. You do background checks and get references and talk to everybody else who's involved. So you would do all that research and background before you did it, but you'd find a way where you could still keep your kid out of government school. But I'm still on the, how much money that I would have to pay out. I guess if you got a job, but see, what would happen is you wouldn't have as much experience. So say it was, 10 years. So you hadn't worked in 10 years. It's going to be hard for you to get a job. So you're not going to be making the type of money that you would have been making if you had worked all those 10 years. So you would be owed. I mean, if you went to court, they definitely give it to you. I, of course, would want to avoid courts, but I would think even then you would deserve some, not the full amount of alimony because you could get a job, but still some amount of alimony along with child support, unless it was a joint custody type thing and, we would work out who bought who what. And it's kind of fucked up that we're talking about, we haven't even got married yet, and we're talking about what if we got divorced, what would happen. But I do think people need to talk about stuff like this, and this is why things get so fucked up, because nobody talks about how they're going to raise their kids and what are they going to do if they get divorced and all of these things. I don't think people talk about it. They just have kids mostly by accident. And then, we'll just do this and work it out and whatever. And then everything gets all fucked up. And you have the fathers are moving in with their parents and where they're broke. And then the wife is getting alimony, has a boyfriend who has money and is getting money from them too. And, so.
Okay, hold the phone. Obviously, if a married couple breaks up and the ex-wife begins seeing someone, that's up to their boyfriend to give him money. As long as they are using the money from the child support and the alimony to take care of the kids, it's none of their business. If the new boyfriend, treats the girlfriend out to dinner or with gifts or trips, as long as the children are being taken care of in some way.
Well, what I'm saying, and I don't really have a lot more to say about it, but is that having kids and getting married is a big commitment, and it's a big deal, and it should be taken as such. And you have these kids, a lot of them are in your family that are not doing that. And I have ones in my family too that did the same thing.
I have some relatives and some other relatives that are totally and completely fair, where the child support goes strictly to that child.
Oh, well, I'm not talking about the child support. I'm just talking about them having kids and not thinking about the future and what could happen. Where you have, teenagers having kids. And I have relatives that are teenagers that have had kids too. So
it's tragic to say, but yeah. And I think the reason what happens is because they have really poor, they have poor influences and they have poor judgment. I have had relatives where the older relatives try to tell them, don't be stupid. Don't be stupid like me. Be smart. Make smarter decisions. And they still make stupid, dumb decisions. Now, all that means is that person is stupid. Because I do have...
Well, I wouldn't call them stupid. I'd say they are ignorant.
What's the difference? It's the same.
Well, stupid is you're actually... genetically you're stupid, as opposed to being ignorant is just not knowing and thinking you know everything. So there's a big difference between being ignorant, I think, and being stupid. And I think in the case that you're talking about, especially with teenagers that get pregnant, it's a lot of it is more the ignorance. It's a lot of ignorance, and depending on the person, it may be stupid.
Well, that's a huge ignorance, especially when they witness it before their eyes.
Well, yeah, you should learn if your mom, your aunt, a bunch of people in your family have done the same thing, and then you do it, it kind of... But it works both ways. You have some people that see it and then they don't do it. And then you have people that just fall into the same cycle and it just keeps going. But that's really all I wanted to say about divorce. Do you have anything else you want to add before we move on?
Nope.
So what else I wanted to add to this, because the point was that women, of course, say that men get everything and men get more money, which is totally not the truth. They manipulate statistics and things like that. And women get a lot of benefits that men don't get. And people tend to forget that, or women tend to, I wouldn't say forget that, but not exactly recognize some of that. So like you have the sexual side of it where, women are treated, get all these gifts from men. They get this, they get that. And I guess you had something that you were, or a story that you were talking about.
Yes, I was talking about a friend of mine who just seems to have a knack for men just throwing everything at her. I just
doesn't that hurt when you get things thrown at you?
A little, but I can honestly say I have no idea what that's like, and all I can say is damn. Like, how do you get that? Can someone tell me?
So what do you mean she gets things thrown at her, and how are you saying you don't know what that's like when you've been given a lot of gifts in your life, by me at least?
For example, like they pay her bills, they take her on trips. No, like they're not even. No, there's a difference because you are my significant
partner.
Buy
$500 computers.
You're my
iPads.
You're my partner. We have a serious relationship. These men aren't even her significant other. They're not even in a serious relationship. They haven't even slept with her, and they are already willing to give her whatever she wants.
Well, they're just idiots.
I suppose. But what does that mean? Like, what does that mean when a man does things like that for a girl?
It depends. I mean, how much money do they have, and are they just trying to sleep with her? I mean, I'd have to know more details, and if they're just trying to sleep with her or they're trying to date her. But I would never take a girl on a vacation that I was just trying to date. I mean, that's a date. I mean, you got to have a lot of money to have a date be a vacation. And I wouldn't want that anyway, because I wouldn't want a girl to want to be with me for money, because that's really what that is. Why would somebody want a girl to be with them for money? Wouldn't they want them to be with them for them. And there's nothing wrong with taking her out on dates and paying for them. That's fine. But to take on a vacation, I mean, what kind of vacation? Does it, a road trip or something? But they're taking a vacation to like the Bahamas, and they're not even going out. They're not really serious or even really dating. Then that's crazy.
Yeah.
But it's not just that. It's women, and I guess it's more women that are attractive. So you could say that, well, attractive women are treated differently than unattractive women. But even unattractive women, guys will do things to have sex with them, but they'll get like treated specially. Like they think everybody's nice. They think the world is totally different than it really is because everybody's nice to them. And, women get all these things paid for. They get taken out on dates. They get in free at clubs. I mean, that's not like a huge thing, but, they get guys buying them free drinks. And there's a lot of things that women get that guys don't. And I think in the end, at least now there was discrimination against women. Women couldn't do a lot of things. They couldn't be a lot of things. And there's no arguing that. I mean, they couldn't even vote. So there's no arguing that women were somewhat, if you want to call it, oppressed in the past. They definitely were. But women have the power of the vagina. And that power is more powerful than anything else. And even if you go back then. But yeah, women were treated unfairly for a long time. To say now that women are being discriminated against and oppressed and all of this shit is a bunch of bullshit. I mean, I actually have witnessed a lot of women, mostly women, getting promotions and things like that. And it seems like it's because they're women, and women are just advancing women and discriminating against men.
Do you think that men have known this all along, that women are superior to men? And that's why they try to...
I don't think women are superior to men.
I think women are superior to men.
I don't think anybody is superior to anybody, to be honest. I don't think that either women or men are superior. Supposedly, in certain areas, men are smarter than women, and women have certain intelligence that men don't have as well.
Well, the woman does have a vagina.
Right, and that
a man needs.
Right, and it's always going to come down to sex. And you look at it, you look at what, like you're talking about, what a man will do for that and all the money. And never mind that. It's not just, and I'm not that type of person at all, but it's not just the, buying girl stuff. What about wanting to be successful so you can get women? Wanting a nice car, why? So you can get women. Wanting a nice house so you can get women. 90% of the things that guys do, they do to get women. Now you have the other side of it, how there are a lot of guys use women, but I mean, that's kind of on them as well. I mean, if you don't know a guy that well and you sleep with them, well, and maybe you wanted to sleep with them, so maybe you don't care. This whole thing that women can't have sex and it's wrong for women to have sex. I mean, if a woman wants to have sex, why shouldn't they? Why are they a whore and a guy? It's okay for a guy. I mean, women want to. They get enjoyment out of sex, and why is it okay for a guy to sleep with 100 girls and or a girl sleeps with 10 guys and she's a whore? I mean,
okay, let me ask you something. Would you be with a woman who slept with 100 men?
No, but I'm more of a traditional, believe it or not, and I hate using a word conservative, but it's not politically conservative, but I'm more traditional when it comes to relationships. I really am, where, as we talked about earlier, I like the more traditional relationships where I want a woman who wants to is feminine, is a woman. I don't want a manly woman. I really don't want a woman whose number one priority is her career. I want a woman who the most important thing is finding a guy that will make her happy and having a family and all that. So I'm a lot different than some guys, but I don't think a lot of guys would want to be with a girl that slept with 100 guys. That is a lot, but they could always lie about it. I don't know.
Well, what about if a woman, didn't want to be with a man who slept with 100 women?
That happens too. I mean, I have friends that probably way more than that. At least I know of one friend or ex-friend, because I'm not friends with them anymore. So that happens too, where women feel the same way. And, there is something to be said. I'm not saying go crazy with it. I'm just saying that women are, judged unfairly when it comes to sex, that they shouldn't go crazy with it because they can have sex anytime they want to. And that's the difference, is a woman can have sex anytime they want to. A man, it's harder for them to have sex. And I mean, unless they're in a relationship, but I mean, to just go out and pick up a girl and have sex. And that's the difference.
But there's a difference between men and women, because men can have sex and it mean nothing and it doesn't bother them afterwards. Like, they're not dwelling on if that woman they just slept with, likes them or is going to call them or is going to want to be with them in the future. Versus a woman, she's a lot of times when she chooses to sleep with someone, it's not just about, having sex. There is so much more to it that you can't even begin to imagine. When she selects a partner, she's, selecting someone that she potentially sees herself being with someone who she hopes, wants more than just sex. So there's the risk, and she knows
Right.
it. And more often than not, she will not have sex with someone because she's not certain that they are going to want more. So it's not
Right,
easy.
and
It's not easy for a woman to just have sex whenever she wants to, because a lot of times it's not about that. She's not a man.
No, and I understand that, and they need to be careful. My only point in this whole thing is the bottom line is what they're trying to do, the fucking progressives, and they're trying to do this with every minority group they can, even though I don't know that women are a minority group. I think there are more women than there are men. But they're trying to label women a minority group or an oppressed group and get all these groups together and say that they're totally oppressed and it's the white man that is the oppressor and the white man's evil and everybody else is okay. And I'm half Jewish, so I don't know that I count in that whole thing. But what I'm saying is not that people really believe that. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is they're trying to exploit that whole thing on purpose. And I'm talking about the government and politicians. And they're trying to exploit it in order to divide people, have them all fight amongst each other instead of uniting and fighting against the government. So that's what I'm talking about when it comes to that. So they're trying to have men fight against women and say that women are being treated unfairly, and there's the rape culture and there's the patriarchy and all of these things. And really, at this point, it's a bunch of bullshit. Now, 50 years ago, it wasn't. there were a lot of legitimate arguments. But at this point, yes, there's things that benefits that men have that I think women don't, but there's a lot of benefits that women have that men don't. So I think at this point, the fact is that men and women are different. There are differences. And, you know, I believe that you should be able to do whatever you want, whatever sex you are, or whatever race you are, whatever ethnicity, or whatever. And nobody should try to stop you from doing that. But women, this whole idea that women are so oppressed and they're not paid enough money and they manipulate that whole thing. And it's a way to divide people. And that's what they're trying to do.
My question is, how did we go from a woman can have sex whenever she wants to them being oppressed?
Well, because that whole part is the differences between men and women, and they're taking the differences between men and women and using it as, well, women are oppressed and, you know, men are oppressing them in different ways. Whether it's rape, like I said, rape culture is a big thing now that they're talking about, the equal pay, that women aren't paid equally. And there's so many things that go into pay. You can't just say, well, you have the same job title. It doesn't work that way. There's so many details, your experience, where you went to school, your education. I mean, there's so many things. How many years, you know, a lot of women will take time off to have kids. The fact is that men and women are different in a lot of ways, and that's just a fact of life. And to make it like they're exactly the same. Now, at the same time, I would never tell a woman that she can't do something that she wanted to do. I think that she should have every opportunity to do any job or military or whatever that she wants, because I believe in total freedom and being able to pursue whatever you want to pursue. I'm just saying that this whole bullshit where they want to lead to laws on things and get government involved, it's a whole thing to divide people and to create more laws and to get government involved. And that's what they're doing, and it's a bunch of bullshit. Unless you have anything else on that, I was going to move on to the two-parent families where both parents have to work. But if you have...
How do you measure what women, you know, the difference? How do you measure what men and women get paid, you know, differently?
You can't.
So, but how can you tell?
They can take the total of salaries and add up all the women and what they make as a whole, but you can't tell. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that there aren't certain companies that pay women less, but all I see...
Do you feel that women are worth less than men?
No. But all I see...
How do you determine if a woman is making less than a man? If you take
you can't.
If you take a man and a woman who have the same educational background, have the same experience,
you'd have to take so many different things. And my issue is the government is talking about getting involved, and what are they going to do? They're going to use that to take more power over companies, more control, and be able to get into people's lives, because you'd have to go into that amount of detail. And two people may be in the same job, and may have the exact same education, may have the exact same grades. I mean, most of these things are not going to happen, but say they do. What if one of them is smarter? What if one of them works a lot harder? I mean, there's so many things. The woman could be paid more. There's not a... They could have started out at a lower salary. It happens all the time. I'm not saying that some women aren't paid less than men because they're women, because it probably does happen. But all I see is women being promoted and giving more and more money and being promoted to positions of power and management. I see it at every company I've been at, and I see it at companies just as observations. I mean, women right now are thriving in the job industry.
You really don't care one way or another if a man or a woman gets paid more than one another. All you care about is that the government is going to get involved and start prying into companies' private information.
No, it's not true. I think that if everything is the same, that you should be paid fairly. I'll just say that you should be paid fairly based on your job, your experience, and all of those things, whether you're a man or a woman. And yeah, I do care. I think that they should be. But the government should not be getting involved.
So really, it should be up to the employee who determines, what is an okay salary.
Yeah, they should go to their boss. And sorry to interrupt, but if they think they're getting paid unfairly, they should get another job or go to their boss or, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
I have nothing more to say.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Okay. Before we move on, I just wanted to reiterate that, yeah, I do care, but government should not be involved in that. And there probably are circumstances where people are paid unfairly, but I don't think it's anywhere near what they're saying. And I think you could say the same about there are circumstances where men are being paid unfairly as well, and people aren't being paid what they're worth in a lot of situations. So it's really up to that person and that company and not the government, because again, for the government to do it, it would be impossible. So I want to talk about families with two working parents as opposed to one. So these are families that are married that do have kids, but they can't afford to stay home. And this is 80% of families with kids that have to work. Now, you had said earlier that you have a friend who can actually, now they kind of sacrifice. But do you think that more families could go to one person working and that it's more of not a selfish thing, but more of we're not cutting back and we could and make more sacrifices? Or do you think it's just more the jobs aren't there or the salaries aren't there?
I think the reason why both spouses work is because they're greedy, because they want more. They're not willing to live with less. Now, if they want more, the one spouse should strive for a higher salary, a higher paying job.
Or could work two jobs.
But, working two jobs is very exhausting. But at the same time, I think we're living in an age where we're very frivolous and we're very materialistic and we want more and more and more, especially with the new technology. I think that's why a lot of people, and also other couples that I've spoken to, they both want the nice cars, they want the $500,000 house, and, they want all like the top notch, state of the art, electronics and all this stuff, and to be able to go on vacations and, buy their commercialized, material things.
So is that why most of the people that that's why they...
Yeah, both spouses go to work? Absolutely.
And have they actually said that, like, well, the reason we both work is because we want to be able to do this and buy this and buy that? And And why do you think?
The one couple that I spoke to, yes, that's exactly why. But I see it all the time. You know, you have to remember, I work in retail.
Right.
And, you know, I see it's rare, you know, unless the spouse that does make a lot of money, yeah, they buy their wife or whoever's the breadwinner, you know, they buy all these material things. But you have all these, you know, middle class people who they buy commercial material things. Like, for example, Michael Kors, Coach. A lot of people would consider these things high end, but they really not. It's just a label. And they're expensive, but they're not like beyond anyone else, you know, the middle classes means expensive. Like, as opposed to Harry Winston or Hermes, or, you know, there's a lot of, you know, brands and labels that are so expensive that the regular, you know, middle class person can't afford. But what they can afford is commercialized items, and that's what they want, you know, the BMW or the Audi or, you know, Michael Kors or Coach or, you know, things like that. And I think that's the reason why a lot of people, you know, both spouses work, because it's all about material things. It costs money.
Where do you think that it comes from? Because things used to be a lot different, and I think that's one of the reasons why in the 50s and 60s, among other things that we'll just get into briefly, but one of the other differences between the 50s and 60s, besides, you know, jobs and the manufacturing industry and all these things, was the fact that TV, where now when you look on TV, all you see are these people with these great jobs and these big houses and great clothes and all of these things. Do you think that media and TV has had a big influence on people wanting more and wanting all these things and then getting into debt and getting credit cards as well on top of it and all of that?
Of course, because I remember, and I've seen movies where back in the 50s, you know, the wife, she knew how to sew and she would make her own clothes. And there would be like some designer label, you know, line dress, you know, that she could make at home. You know, she'd buy the materials and the pattern and she'd make it herself, and voila, she had some kind of knockoff. My own grandmother used to make my mom and her siblings clothes. They had a sewing machine, and, you know, those were some of the things that they repaired. Just like, you know, we were middle class. My father never hired anyone to fix the plumbing or certain mechanics or, you know, certain maintenance around the house. He did everything.
So people knew a lot more back then too. They could do a lot on their own as well.
Even now, I think a lot of people's, you know, still who don't have the means to pay someone to do it, to hire someone, you know, they're the ones that are skilled, that know how to do the things at home.
Right. But the difference you have now too is the amount of debt, and that people have to have stuff and they have to have it now. And I think a lot of that is the media. But I want to mention a couple other things and just go through them quickly, and then get your thoughts on them after. So back in the 50s and 60s, you had manufacturing, which basically all moved overseas due to government regulations. The United States has the highest corporate tax rate in the world right now. Russia is lower, which is crazy. Inflation, where they print money like it's nothing. You have the national debt. Of course, the Fed, as I mentioned, printing, you know, all the money that they print. I didn't say the Fed. I just said, you know, printing money. But it's the Fed that's printing all this money. And you mentioned the, you know, people not willing to sacrifice as another part of it, as well as some people really can't afford it. I mean, there are, I don't know what the percentage of people that just can't afford it, but I'm sure there's those people as well. I mean, do you know people that have to have both because even with us, and I look at the money we make combined, and I'm not going to say it's pretty good money, yet it, and it's before taxes, so it seems like we get killed on taxes. I mean, I got $20,000 out last year, counting Social Security and everything. But do you think that there are a large percentage of people that if both parents didn't work, they couldn't afford just basic necessities?
No, wait, I don't understand the question.
Well, saying that it's not all about that. Part of it is about wanting these things, and then part of it is, salaries are lower and stuff like that. But also that it's just that they can't make enough money to pay the rent and the electric bill and have a car and all of these things that they have to have. They both have to work in order to support their kids and have the basic necessities. I'm not talking about having, some great luxury car or a nice house or even having a house. I'm talking about living in an apartment, having a one-car family that they need to work. Both parents need to work or they can't afford their bills.
Honestly, I do think that it's because of the material things both spouses work, because if one spouse was the only one that was working, I think they would be able to afford the basics. Okay, perfect example. Look at the cell phone. It's not just a cell phone. It's a cell phone where you have access to the internet, that they charge an arm and a leg, and for what? What are they charging for? It costs nothing to produce internet connection or, internet service.
Well, the cell phone basically hardly costs anything because they pay they were talking about this today actually on Glenn Beck, that because they pay nothing to the workers in China that make them, they're so damn cheap, but then they sell them here, for $750. But
exactly.
But they'd be like $2,000 if they didn't.
Yeah.
Like if they had people make them here, they'd be like $2,000 for a phone.
And just think about all the people who wouldn't be able to afford that $2,000. Not only that, the cell phone bill wouldn't be as high. I pay, I have cell phone service, and I pay for your line and my line, and I currently pay monthly.
That would be the show line.
The show
line. So please call in at 702-470-7664.
So I believe my phone bill is roughly $135 to $40.
Yeah, that's like mine. Mine's like $140 right now. But I'm paying for two phones and one's almost paid off, so that it will drop down to like $100.
How are you paying for two phones?
Well, the old
that's
phone,
right. You have the old phone
totally
and the new
paid
phone.
off. It will be paid off in like one more payment or something.
Oh, so you're making payments on both phones?
Yeah, but I only owed like $100 and something. I owed less than what the deductible was on the insurance. I owed less than $175. So it was about 3 or 4 payments more of $40 or something like that.
Well, think about, what if we both didn't have these extra phones?
Right, that's like $300 right there.
Yeah, what if we just had, a landline house phone? We didn't each have cell phones. So, but I remember when my mom had a landline, I think it was like $25 a month as opposed to, let's just say $300.
Yeah, they're cheap.
So $300 times 12 months. That's $3,600. It's $3,600.
Yeah, you would save a lot of money,
as opposed to $25 a month.
But then again, on things like a car, like my car now, I bought it in December of 2006. It's about to be 10 years old. I could have traded in my car and bought a new car and got a car payment, but instead I said, why spend the extra money to get a brand new car? Now, what you're saying is most people, that's what they would do. They'd say, hey, we need a brand new car. So I'm going to go and, trade my car in and get a brand new car. I want to get as much as I can. I mean, once it gets to a point where
it begins to cost you money.
Yeah. And I'm worried about it breaking down. I want a reliable car. Then, yeah, I'll trade it in. But it only has 80,000 miles on it. So why would I, and it's in great shape. It maybe needs, some scuff marks on the bumpers and whatnot. But I mean, it's still a nice car. So, but like you're saying, most people would say my car is 10 years old. I'm trading it in for a brand new car.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I agree with you that that's part of it, but I also think there's a certain percentage that needs to. But really, that's sad, the people that are just want more things, because they take advantage of something that shouldn't exist. Government babysitting. They should be, one of those parents should be at home with their fucking kid instead of dropping them off at the government babysitter. That why should we have to pay for other people's kids' education?
Well, what about the people where the stay-at-home parent is a stay-at-home parent, but their children still go to public school?
Yeah, that's even worse, because why stay at home then?
But what if the parents aren't, smart enough to give their child an education?
Well, there's a lot of other ways. There's books, there's tutors, there's a lot of things that you can do. And I think that's kind of an excuse, especially, I mean, they can't teach, a 5-year-old. So when you get to like high school and maybe junior high, I understand. But
that's how it used to be. It was families with means. I think the government only provided public school up until middle school or something, and then after that it was only people families with means, they would pay
that was
for
a
high school,
long time ago.
High school education and college.
It started in Massachusetts in 18 something, and I forget the guy's name, Horace Mann, who basically brought over the Prussian system, which was essentially to train soldiers and to train people to agree with the government. And that's what the founding of schools. But what I'm saying is, that those people, instead of sending their kids to government schools, government babysitting, they should have their kids home with them and be homeschooling them. Of course, that's my opinion. So there are some things, I guess, I have an opinion on that, because everybody else is paying for I guess you're paying too, you being that person. But no, I don't believe in government schools. So I disagree with that. If you want to send your kid to a school, then send them to a private school.
So how does that work? You have a child who's homeschooled, and they are smart enough to take the SATs and get into a college. Now, they don't have a high school diploma. So what's the equivalent to that?
They can still get one, or they can get a GED. The statistics are that homeschoolers are test way higher than.
No, but my question is how do they get,
a high school diploma?
Like certification? Because honestly, and I'll be honest with you, and I kind of feel bad, I look down on someone who has a GED.
Well, because you look at them as somebody who couldn't get through school, who had to drop out.
Yeah.
So that's why.
But I think that's tragic, because they do take a test and they pass. They do have the knowledge that a high school student has, if not more, because they actually know the information on the spot.
There is some type of certification that you can get besides GED. I think there's testing, that there's certain companies that have testing that would be the equivalent of high school diploma. There's also internet in Las Vegas. It's free. It's public schooling, but they don't have the same curriculum as Common Core. So for high school, you could do that and get a high school diploma that way. But either way, they can take their SATs and they're scoring so much higher than government schooled kids because the government schools are failing. So anything else that you want to mention about that before we move on to the one parent households? And we're going to take a quick break before that, but anything else you want to mention before we
Not
move
that I
on
can
to
think
that?
of.
So we're going to take a quick break, then we're going to move on to one parent households, talk briefly about how the war on poverty basically destroyed a lot of things, and then talk about other traditional families and rights of other family members. And then we'll try to wrap up the show by 9:30. So we will be right back after this. And as I always mention, I don't play commercials. So what I play during the breaks are educational and important, and there are things that you can learn from. So just to add that to let everybody know, I occasionally bring that up. I think most people realize that, but we don't play commercials. We take breaks. Mostly I take breaks so I can play these clips, because what I do is whatever the subject is, I go out and find clips. So I put a lot of work into this because that's another thing I do. But of course, again, I mean, I do it because I love doing it. And I love the fact that Katie now is, at least for the time being, I don't know how much longer she'll be doing it, because I don't want her to do it if it's not something she doesn't want to do. But I think she does a great job. Please send us your emails at nonpartisanlibertyforall@gmail.com or go to nonpartisanlibertyforall.com. And if you like Katie on the show, please send your comments so I can show them to her so she can see how good she is on the air, and not only her opinions, but I think she has a great voice as well. So definitely check us out on nonpartisanlibertyforall.com, and we will be back after this.
Young dudes on welfare, they got a choice.
A lot of women are taking care of children on their own. In those circumstances, women definitely need more welfare support in order to take care of their families.
No, there's other it's half and half. Half the people do have a choice.
I grew up in the Dominican Republic, and I came here when I was a teenager. And pretty much I grew up in a very stable family. My parents, they didn't believe in taking anything from the government. Like if you took something from the government, that meant that you were lazy, you were no good, you failed. It was like a symbol of failure that you will be wearing. So if anybody in the family were on food stamps or anything like that, it would be kept secret. And you weren't allowed to talk about it because it was not good.
My name is Loretta Brennan, 35 years old. I live in South Boston, Massachusetts, in the Old Colony housing development.
I got on welfare because things got really rough for me. I got pregnant and I was in a stable relationship, but then I got a divorce and things just went down bottom hill. From there, I was living in New York, had to come back to Boston and start all over again. I ended up living with my mom, so I needed an income, and I wanted to go back to school. I had an associate's degree, and I wanted to get the bachelor's because things weren't doing so good. And welfare was my only choice.
I was on welfare for over 4 years.
I got on welfare because when I first came to this country, I wanted to go to school. I wanted to be independent, and there was no way for my mom to support me. My mom was also on welfare, and I didn't have any support from anybody else.
My son, I have one child. His name is Francis.
I go to school. I'll bring you down the table, all right? Yeah. Have a good day. We get a kiss. See you 2:15, all right?
I grew up in South Boston in the Old Colony projects, and I have a twin brother and 2 other brothers. My mother was a single mother who waitressed, and I've always lived in South Boston.
I mean, this is America. There's always a choice. You have the choice to sit on the couch, or you have the choice to get off your butt and make something happen.
Do people on welfare have other choices? I personally, for me, I don't think so. It was pretty good to think, wow, I can go on welfare and I don't have to go find a man to support me. And I think that's good to have that mental stability to be able to say, I'm going to focus on a goal and work on this goal while I'm on welfare. So that way I could have something better in the future. But other choices, what other choices? Where are you going to, if you don't have the education to get you that job that's going to replace the income that you're receiving from welfare, you're pretty much stuck.
I think that people on welfare have no other choice. Who would choose to live off of $500 a month? Not even. With a family, no.
No, I feel like welfare is one of those things where it allows people to get comfortable, and they see that, I'm sitting here not doing anything, and there's other people that are out there working hard for me to sit and do nothing, and it allows them to get comfortable and not ever want to progress or do anything.
I'm not on welfare now. I was on it, so I don't get any assistance now, so I'd rather work. When you're on welfare, you have to give forms every month, get things signed repeatedly.
My plans for the future are two. The first one is to go further in my career in microbiology. I want to finish it. And my other plan is to keep painting and probably to find a way to expose my paintings in a gallery. And I don't know, I want everybody to know that I'm not a lazy person, that in the time that I was in welfare, I've been taking my free time to paint some things that were in my mind, things that I thought were beautiful things. And I spend my free time doing that, but I never recognized that they were good enough to show it to other people.
My plans for the future is to get a really good job that pays me $30 an hour. And for that, I'm planning to have like my own business on the side and also find a job that will get me as close as possible to that income.
My plan for the short term is to get my associates at Bunker Hill Community College, and I'll be doing that in May, and then I'll plan to go to Northeastern in September.
The welfare system is a topic of controversy. Some Americans are believed to exploit the system while others depend on it for survival and to help them stand on their feet.
When you're a child, your mom and dad are the entire universe, and that universe is expanding. Just this week, the lead actor in Transparent, who plays a transgender father, won a Golden Globe. And 2 little boys in Kentucky are part of this expanding world. Their transgender parents have endured more than most to find each other and to bring them into the world. A mom and dad who haven't told their neighbors they weren't born this way, haven't told them, that is, until tonight. On the surface, the Bowsers may look like an ordinary family.
Do we have tomatoes?
There's mom, Bianca, age 32, dad, Nick, he's 27. And their 2 rambunctious toddlers, Kai, aged 3, and Pax, 17 months.
I got it! All right, yay! Merry Christmas.
But in their wildest dreams, these 2 parents never imagined that they would get to enjoy this kind of ordinary. Because behind her long black hair and feminine figure, Bianca was born a boy named Jason. And despite his cropped hair and the whisper of a mustache, Nick was born a girl named Nicole.
We fit the basic definition of what a transgender person is, so...
Let me just show you a trick, though, okay?
Our children do not see us as transgender people. We are mommy and daddy.
Don't go, mommy and daddy. We'll be right back.
A mommy and a daddy with a twist. Both were born in Georgia and have followed remarkably mirrored paths. How old were each of you when you first realized something's not right? I don't think this is matching up.
I guess it was about 5 years old. I remember sneaking into Mom's closet when she was off at work and putting on a pair of heels. I've always felt more liberated during those moments.
I always thought, I want to be a boy. I looked at boys, I saw, guys with their shirts off, and I was like, that's what I want to look like.
As teenagers, feeling trapped in their bodies, they faced cruel taunts.
Name calling and being picked on and bullying.
What kinds of names?
Queer, fag, the general things. Cruel names, yes. My mannerisms were more effeminate and I just did not fit the mold.
Nick says he didn't have it any easier. He left home at 17. Was your family supportive?
No, they were not, no.
Wow, so both of you experienced a lot of rejection around trying to figure out who you were as people.
Right.
I don't think anybody can understand what it's like to be us.
Unless you're transgender, you
Unless
aren't.
you're transgender, you won't.
No. 20 is when I came to terms with being transgender, starting to live my life as a woman, applying the makeup, wearing women's clothing.
And is that when you first truly feel like you found happiness?
That is where a heavy weight on my shoulders was lifted, yes.
But even after struggling for so long to find their true identities, they still never believed they'd find anyone else. Did you ever feel like no one's gonna ever want to be with me because of who I am?
Yes.
So neither of you ever expected to find a soulmate, a life mate?
No.
No, not at all.
Each was taking hormones and considering expensive surgeries to transform their bodies into the genders they so deeply believed they were born to be.
I had planned on gender reassignment surgery, and I was starting to save up my money for it. I had already made my plan, and then I met Nick.
Bianca, a performer at a local club, was getting ready for her act when one night Nick walked in.
He caught my eye, and our bartender friend, I asked her if she knew who he was, and she said yeah. And I said, well, just let him know I think he's cute.
And Bianca walked up to me and said who she was.
How quickly did the two of you fall in love?
It was pretty instant for me.
They dated for a year. And marriage, a small ceremony in Georgia. The first dance, and a first step to their life together. One in which their most intimate moments require literally reverting to the sexual identities with which they were born, but now reject.
People want to know how we have sex. I'm like, well, how do you have sex?
The same way you have sex.
Same way.
Right.
It works all the same way.
In essence, when you are having sex, you're having sex with a man.
I don't view Bianca as a man, regardless of what she might have. For me, in my head, that's not what I see. It's not how I feel.
They began to consider what every married couple does, having kids. Putting aside any plans for gender surgery, they decided instead to spend their savings on raising a family. So Nick, who had spent 7 years becoming a man, agreed to undergo yet another physical transformation, becoming a mother.
It was an absolutely horrible experience.
Really?
The almost 20 months total of my life was probably the darkest time in my entire life. My brain was telling me that I was one person, my body looks like a completely different person. It was a daily struggle between mind and body.
You were afraid to walk outside because people would see a pregnant
I
man.
I didn't want to leave the house.
Nick delivered both boys by cesarean section. They moved to this quiet neighborhood in Louisville, Kentucky. And as we followed this modern family to the toy store,
So.
Shark?
Yeah.
And to the aquarium.
Cheese.
Hi
No, we're going to leave that alone, okay?
We wondered what happens when these lively toddlers grow older and start asking questions.
What are you going to tell these two beautiful boys one day about who mommy and daddy are?
I don't know when or how or...
Gradually and in ways that they can understand. I mean, eventually the questions will come about. Schools calling us and saying, your child said that his mommy has a penis and things like that.
Better have an answer ready for that one.
Right.
Every child loves to hear the story of how they were born. And Kai and Pax have a big twist to their story.
They do.
They came out of daddy's body.
Right. We're telling them the truth, and I think that's the most important thing, and in a way that they can understand.
I'll push. Okay, you push.
Nick and Bianca have a lot of faith and hope that their children will understand and that their neighbors and school friends will see this family and them as human beings, nothing more and nothing less.
I would like to think that society as a whole, by the time Kai is in 3rd and 4th grade, will have changed. I mean, it's changed from 15 years ago. Why shouldn't it change in the next 3 to 4 years?
Hell, thank you.
Thank you so much. How many people here know that while you look like a man and a woman, underneath right now you are still a man and a woman?
Currently, the people that we work with after this airs, I don't know.
I was going to say, with the caveat, this is about to be on
yeah.
national television. I mean, are you a little worried that when people see you on 2020 that there's going to be a reaction to this?
No.
Not concerned. People will have opinions.
All right, come this way. Good job.
Basically, what you want America to know is that you are...
No different than anybody else.
Well,
Well,
yes.
we're different, but, we do the same things everybody else does.
You want to try that?
We're the same type of family everybody else is.
You are listening to Nonpartisan Liberty for All Radio with your host, Dave Bourne. Call in at 702-470-7664 or Skype in, username Nonpartisan Liberty for All.
Nonpartisan Liberty for All. Check us out at nonpartisanlibertyforall.com. Of course, that voiceover was done by our beautiful co-host, Katie Reyes, the very talented Katie Reyes, who thinks that she's not, but I think she does a great job. So before we went to break, and we'll talk a little about the transgender couple if we have time, but the clip before that had to do with single parents and welfare. And one of the things that comes right away that I think about when I think about parents on welfare and parents talking about schools being bad in poor neighborhoods is same thing. Why aren't you homeschooling your kids? And I guarantee you that these parents that are on welfare, that are home, are not homeschooling their kids. They're sending their kids to government schools. And that fucking pisses me off even more. At least do something productive and watch your kids instead of sending them to government babysitting. Now, in general, there were different opinions. They were saying that, well, I can do this while I'm on welfare and then get a good job later. And I don't believe in welfare because I don't believe that people should be paying the government at the barrel of a gun, essentially, because this is all tax money, through the threat of force and extortion, should be extorting money and giving it to other people. I don't think they should be extorting money, period. So if they're not extorting money, then they can't be giving it to other people. I do, however, believe that people need help and that churches and other charities would help them and would weed out the people that were just trying to game the system. And I think that in a society either without government or limited government where there were no taxes, that more people would give money to help out, and they'd help out in their neighborhoods if they knew somebody in their neighborhood could lost their job or couldn't afford to take care of their kids. A lot of this, though, is what about the incentive where people have more kids? And this kind of started with the war on poverty. The war on poverty, basically what it did was it gave an incentive for people to have more kids, to not get married or remarried, because if they do, they're going to lose their welfare. So what they can do is they can date, they can have a live-in boyfriend who gets to live there for free because they're getting free housing, and then he can have a job and give them money, and they can also get welfare. So I'm not saying that everybody is abusing the system and that nobody actually really needs the money, but if you can't afford to have kids, why are you having them? Now, there's situations where, you know, something happens, like an accident or, you know, something in your life, a life-changing event happens, and then you need to go on welfare, which is usually more Social Security. But the type that we're talking about is these one-parent households that are supported by welfare. Then you have the one-parent households where you have mothers that are working their ass off, because most one-parent households are mothers. There are fathers, but more of them are mothers that are working two jobs, while you have these other women that continue to have kids that are collecting welfare. And really, the war on poverty was just a ridiculous. I mean, fucking Johnson and his bullshit. And and this is a quote, that he declared an unconditional war on poverty in America, not simply to relieve the symptoms of poverty, but to cure it, and above all, to prevent it. And of course, this hasn't worked, because today there are over 126 federal anti-poverty programs, 126, and federal spending has risen from $107 billion to $688 billion, or 640%. And that's in constant dollars. So what is your opinion on welfare and single parents? And really, you know, you have the single parents that work two jobs, and unfortunately their kids probably never see them, but they're at least, you know, trying to support their families and do something better. And then you have all the welfare parents who continue to have kids. They get food stamps and money from the government, Section 8 housing. And if you have a kid, isn't your responsibility to fucking pay for it?
I have so many mixed feelings about welfare. On one side, I do feel that there are those who should have it, but should do something to progress themselves into making a better life. That way they don't have to rely on that. It shouldn't be a permanent thing. I think that welfare should be a lot like, for example, unemployment. You have so long to get your stuff together, you know, to eventually be able to support yourself and get on track. You know, not to rely on it, you know, forever. You know, and there's a lot of situations where people will just keep shooting out kids so they can get free money from the government. Yeah,
that's what I was going to say. And that's why they get it, because people are like, well, it's not the kids' fault, so you can't let the kids starve. Then they should give up their kids, give them up for adoption. If you can't afford to take care of kids, then either have a fucking abortion or give them up for adoption. They know that they're going to get taken care of. They know that they can get welfare if they have kids. So there are people that need it, but most of the people that need it get more of like a Social Security type thing, you know, if something happens where they can't work anymore, or, you know, food stamps, or some people do get to a point where they're down on their luck for a certain period of time. But I think that could all be covered by charity, to be honest. And if there were no taxes and no Social Security, more people would give and more people would help out their own neighborhoods.
I thought you were asking me for my opinion.
I am. We're having a conversation.
But you just like totally chimed in and took over my spot.
Well, sorry. We were having a conversation. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Anyway,
I was responding to your comment and conversating.
Well, I don't even know what I was saying. Never mind.
Well, no, you were saying that you see kind of both sides of it and that it should only be for a certain amount of time. But what you had said that kind of set me off was that they keep having more kids.
Yes, I've heard of, instances where people just have more kids because they don't want to run out of their welfare. It's tragic. I know it's sad. Sometimes I don't even like to talk about it because it upsets me in a way. If you do have, God forbid, someone has a child and they're ill and they happen to be a single mother, or a single father, tragedy could happen where the mother dies, in birth or has an accident. And not a lot of people always have, relatives that can help them. There is a beauty of having a close-knit family and, you have relatives that can help you out with babysitting and stuff. But not everyone has that. Take for example, us. What if, God forbid something happens to my mom, your mom, she doesn't look like she's going to move to the West Coast anytime soon. And let's say you didn't have the educational background you did or experience that you did. And, you made half of what you make now. And
then I probably wouldn't have kids.
And that's another thing. But what if, we had an accident, and.
Well, I have insurance that will cover that. And I'll get 60 or 80% of my pay if I'm in an accident.
No, I'm saying a pregnancy accident.
Oh, okay.
What if I didn't want? What if I didn't? What
accident.
if I didn't want to get an abortion? What if I wanted to have the child because I didn't believe in abortion? So there's a lot of
adoption.
What if I didn't want to give up the child?
Well, then you have to be responsible for supporting
I think
it.
honestly, you and I, let's say that would happen. Honestly, what would really happen? You would probably work during the day. And I would work at night, which a lot of families do that.
Yeah, my father, because my mother actually stayed at home until I was 5, I think. And my father worked like 80 hours, literally 80 hours a week, something ridiculous like that to support us. Yeah. It was insane. So, people do it. And then you have the people that, take the easy way out.
And that happened, that actually happened with me and my family. I can recall it wasn't for long, because I eventually did get older. But I remember my father always worked in construction. So he worked during the day. And there was a period where my mother had like a graveyard job or had like a swing shift job. So where someone was home with me, because when I was, early, I only had half day of like preschool. I was probably home by I want to see 12 or 2, somewhere early in the afternoon I got home. But I remember my mom would work late at night. And then there were times, because my dad worked in construction and him being in the union, sometimes work would run out and he'd be unemployed. And I remember my mom would work and my dad would stay home and take care of me or vice versa, So, there are families who are hardworking, who they don't resort to welfare only because of their pride. They don't want to be those families that rely on welfare, because it's either an embarrassment or, they feel that they're better than that. But then you have those families who they use it to their advantage and they have no shame or.
Well, if you have like an emergency, like you're saying, somebody has a job and things happen, and that's when, it should be used. But what happens is the majority of people don't use it that way. They use it because they expect the government to take care of their kids. Not only that, they get voters out of it because they're going to vote for whatever person is going to give them free shit, basically, because they don't want their welfare taken away.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people do take advantage, and I think that's what's wrong with the system, because I think it is a good thing to help out some that are in need, that do need it, because, sometimes things happen, and it's sad to think of, a child suffering because a parent, doesn't have the means or educational background to be able to take care of them. And it's hard for some people, some people who, like, let's say they're single and, they have a rendezvous with someone, they get pregnant, and, that their lover doesn't want to have anything to do with them. And now they're stuck, and they're pregnant, but they can't bring themselves to have an abortion, because it's hard for a mother to do that. And now it's like, and now what? They can't work because they have to take care of their kid, and, it's just an endless cycle. And sometimes some people do help. And unfortunately, there's an expense, and the expense is the child has to be put in public school or some kind of daycare while the single parent works like 70 hours a week just to support them. Or, sometimes they physically can't work those many hours or don't have the education to find a job that pays well, and they have to resort to welfare. And then you have those people that take advantage. It's an endless cycle, and it's tragic. It is. When do we draw the line?
Well, I think, taxes get eliminated, and when there's no taxes, there's no government money to spend on any programs. And all of these programs are supported by violence, because if you don't pay your taxes, you get the government to come after you, and it will lead to violence and them coming after you with guns to collect your taxes. So, it's using violence to help out people who put themselves in these situations in the first place. Because what about self-responsibility? I know there's things that happen, and I understand that, but there's also self-responsibility as well, and making sure that you don't get in certain situations. And I'm not talking about having a kid, but what about trying to better yourself through education? And some of these people haven't even graduated from high school, never mind, college. So anything else you want to say about welfare before we wrap it up? Because there's a couple other things I want to talk about real briefly, and then we'll
the only thing
end
I
the
really
show.
want to say is, like, I get so overwhelmed. Sometimes I don't even want to think about it. But sometimes I wonder is how does it get to as far as it's gotten now? It's like tax after tax after tax after tax after tax. They just want to reel in the money.
It will never end. It's a never ending hole, because what happens is it's like, well, we need money for this. They'll always need money for something. So taxes, that's why it's always no. When any, like locally, they wanted a tax to add to the sales tax for cops. They're always going to ask for more taxes, no matter what happens. It's, well, now we need more money for this. We need money for that. It's a never ending bottomless hole. They will always want more money and more and more. And it's insane. And the government will continue to expand and get involved in things they shouldn't. And no, it will never stop. It will continue forever as long as there's a government. So that's really at least my opinion on taxes. And really, if you look at the history, it's pretty much what it is.
Hey, so why can't we opt out? Like, let's say, how come they can't come up with something where you opt out of paying, what's the tax for the school system if your children are, in fact, homeschooled?
Because what they're going to do is say, essentially, that the kids that don't pay any tax, what about all the families on welfare that aren't paying any tax? You're covering their payments. So you should be able to opt out of everything. If you don't want something, you should be able to opt out, but you can't. It's all based on force. They're going to force you to pay it. They're going to force you to do all these things. You can't say, hey, you know what? I don't want to use the police, so I don't want to pay for them. So essentially, hey, I can't call the police. Fine. Don't come, if I call. But I'm not going to pay, and I'm not going to pay for you, and I'm fine with that. But they're not going to let you do that. They're not going to let you choose what you want and what you don't. It's not like, DirecTV where you can choose your packages. I want this channel, but I don't want this one. Or I want to, when I buy, you live in a house, you just want electricity and you just want, well, I guess pretty much it comes with what you pretty much need, everything. But it's not a pick and choose type thing, because otherwise a lot of people would opt out and all of these programs would go away. Welfare would go away because the people that are getting welfare aren't paying for it. So everybody else would say, no, I don't want to pay for welfare. So they force people at the barrel of a gun and tanks and men dressed in stupid uniforms to do it. So in our, we only got a couple minutes and really we kind of went a little over, but I just wanted to talk about real briefly two things. One, non-traditional families, meaning, really non-traditional families, gay families, transgender families, and remarried families. So you have, of course, we played the video with the transgender family, and you have gay families. The only thing I would have to say about gay families with kids is apply the same principles I apply to straight families with kids. Is I don't think they should send them to government schools, and I think one of them should stay home. Besides that, it's not really a issue to me if gay families or lesbian families. I don't have a problem with it. The same with transgender families as well. I don't have a problem with transgender family, or if they adopt kids or in that clip where they had their own kids. But same thing, I think that it applies my beliefs as far as government schools and a parent staying home and being responsible and not sending your kid off to government babysitting applies to all sexual orientations. But what are your thoughts on transgender and gay families?
My only thought is, I suppose, if the child grows up with seeing that, it's not a big deal. But it's all about environment, because I have seen children where they're not used to seeing that stuff and they're very young and they think it's strange, because it's something they're not used to, they're not aware of. But obviously, if you're a child being raised in that kind of environment, it's not gonna be a big deal.
Would you not want your kid to play with another kid whose parents were gay or transgender?
No, that's silly. Why would I have a problem with that?
No, I wouldn't either. I'm just asking.
No.
To see, two dads or two moms, or the transgender couple that looks kind of, more. There are transgender couples that actually look like a man and woman, and then there are some that don't. You see guys that are dressed as girls that don't look like girls. I mean, again, I personally don't care. I would just talk to my kid and explain, you know, this is
that's all you really got to do, because that's what I went through. I can't remember an exact situation, but I remember when I did have questions, I would just simply ask my mom. And this is the wonderful thing I loved about my mom. My mom was very honest with me about everything. I had a question, she would ask me. If she knew it was something I wouldn't understand, even if she tried explaining it to me, she would just say, okay, you know, you're too young, you know, I'll tell you when you're older. And I think she was right, because she would tell me things that she knew that I would have like learned to understand. For example, just off the top of my head, prostitution and what it was, you know.
It would be hard for me to do that. Not to interrupt, but it would be hard for me not to explain, because I'd want to try to explain, and I would think, well, like, the only thing I can recall, explain.
The only thing I can recall, which I do agree to her, because I think it would have been strange. Like, I think some things are a little too much for a child's mind.
No, I agree, but I just think, like, I can explain anything or like, whatever.
Because I remember her explaining prostitution when I first saw the movie Pretty Woman, and even though I didn't know what sex was exactly, I still had some kind of, you know, thought on it, because it's natural, it's instinct.
Like kissing and stuff like that, you knew that they would pay to, you know, do that type of stuff.
But then also, like, you know, people who are gay. There was one time, I think I was 10, and apparently we were at the swap meet, and apparently there was a transvestite or whatever. It was a man dressed as a woman, and my mom didn't want me to freak out, so she tried to warn me, and I remember her saying something like, "Mijita, did you see that? It is, you know, did you see that?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" "Well, don't freak out, but there was a man and he was dressed like a woman." And then I wasn't like weirded out or scared. I was curious, like, what? A man dressed like a woman? And I wanted to see, but I didn't see the man. And I was like, why was he dressed like a woman? And she would just say, well, some men like to dress like women. And I'm like, okay.
Or either that or it's Halloween.
And there was the first time I saw a woman who looked like a man. It was very strange for me, you know, and I thought, but then like a lot of times you have TV, you know, to tell you, okay, you know, there are men out there or women out there.
With like Maury Povich and Jerry Springer and all those shows.
Growing up, I was always taught to not judge. You know, I don't know what places, you know, on earth where they still, you know, maybe, you know, Middle Eastern or third world countries where it's illegal to be a homosexual, you know, let alone dress, you know, cross-dress.
Well, some of the Middle Eastern, Saudi Arabia, I believe, is one of them.
You know, I was growing up, whether it was television, school, I was always raised to be accepting, and that, you know, that there are people out there that are different, and to not judge them, and in every way, you know. And even I mean, but it, like I said, even though I was, you know, taught to not judge, I, at some point, still thought it was strange because I wasn't used to it. Even my very own cousin, you know, who's a lesbian, and I always thought, you know, I could always tell, you know, that
and she's somewhat manly.
She's like the butch.
I mean, you could tell she's a girl. She's not that manly, but she's
got like, you know, those
like a tomboy.
Yeah, like those masculine features where they would try to put on a dress on her, and it just didn't feel right.
It's her movements too.
It was strange to see her in a dress. Like, that's what I'm saying.
Her mannerisms and her movements are kind of manly.
Yeah. So, and even though it was strange for me, it was still strange to see her in a dress. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, I understand. Well, the last thing I want to cover is remarried families, as well as rights of other family members to kids. So I had played earlier in the show, there was a clip about a law in California about step parents having the rights to still see the kids or make decisions or whatever. So I think that unless they've been adopted, I don't think step parents have any rights. If the father is still involved or the mother, depending on who they're living with, I don't. Well, the right to, and Katie's mic wasn't turned up for that. What she said was, what do you mean by rights? What I mean by rights is, say, like the right to visitation or the right to make decisions concerning the kid or anything like that. I don't believe that step parents really have that right, except, in the house, if they live together, they can somewhat parent them. Although I don't believe in telling kids what to do and all that anyway. But so say you were married, or not you, but say somebody you knew married somebody with a kid and then they got divorced. Should that person have visitation to their stepkid, or should they have while they're together? Should they have the right to make any decisions in the kid's life? I mean, any serious decisions. I can't think of any off the top of my head.
Like
and
medical decisions?
I guess that would be a good example of one of them. And also, along with that, just because we don't have that much time left, the other one would be grandparents, because there's been grandparents that have sued for rights to see their grandkids when the parents didn't want anything to do with their parents. So the parents of the kids didn't want anything to do with the kids' grandparents, and they wouldn't let them see them. And there have been court cases in there as well. So visitation being the biggest thing. So what are your thoughts on both? I would say that for me, I don't believe they have any rights. I don't believe anybody besides the parents, unless they get adopted. If they're legally adopted, then that's different. Besides them being legally adopted, I don't believe that the step parents or the grandparents, for that matter, have any rights to the kid at all. I think only the parents. And even when it comes to the parents, as how we talked about last week, I don't really believe that the parents, especially in teenage years, have the right to tell kids what to do. And I believe in peaceful parenting and giving kids freedom. But so what are your thoughts on those two things with grandparents and step parents?
Well, on the grandparents thing, it's tricky. I can only imagine that obviously if the grandparents are good people and get along with, their child, that their child would allow their parents to see their child. But yeah, if for any reason person doesn't want their parents to see their child,
it would probably be because they did something bad.
Yeah,
and
like
that's
what
why.
right do they have? Now, let's say, for example, you have a married couple who has children and one of the spouses die. And the spouse that died, their parents,
there's been court cases
they want to
about
be able
that
to see
as
the
well.
child, but they've done nothing. They've done nothing to cause harm or any reason for them not to see the child, because that's like next of kin.
Well, that's what, not to interrupt,
really,
but there's been court cases, like I was saying about that as well, where, somebody
or not just, not just grandparents, but what about the family in general? What if the extended family wants to know?
Aunts and uncles and
I
still don't think they have any right. I only think the parents.
I guess you could say technically. I mean, if you legally say, they don't have any rights, but I mean, that would just be a courtesy, you know, to allow the family to know the child. But bottom line, I don't think there's nothing.
The government should get involved and give them, you know, like in a court case?
Yeah, I don't think they would have a case. Like, I don't think that they would have grounds for a case.
What about when it came to, like you said, if one of the parents died and their family wanted to see the kid and the remaining parent?
I think that would be up to the spouse that passed. Like, it could be like in a will. And I think that obviously the spouses, they would have some kind of agreement. Like, I have even told you, you know, if we ever had kids and I died, you know, I'd expect you to let my mother see our children.
I still think that would be up to me. I'm not saying I wouldn't, but I don't think it's none of the government's business. If I didn't want to have your mother see the kid,
so what if me as
that
the
would
dying,
be my right.
What about me as the dying parent if I left it in my will?
I don't think that would be that would be upheld in a court of law.
Well, I mean,
unless you gave you couldn't give custody neither, because that would be only if custody was taken away from me. So you could, I guess, if both of us died, but I think we'd both have to agree to that. So it depends on the state, because some states are different than others. But in a state like Nevada, I don't think any of that would fly.
I mean, I honestly think, like anything else, you know, whether it's a parent or grandparents, if they have done nothing to bring harm or distress to the child, why not have the right?
Yeah, but they may say that they haven't.
Mm-hmm. Well, then that would have to be proven.
That's a matter of opinion, you know. Like I could say that, you know, of course, in the case of my mother, I would have no problem with her seeing my kids, but there's certain relatives that I probably wouldn't let them see my kids, and they would say, why wouldn't he let us see them? And they would say that they didn't do anything wrong, and I would disagree. So it's subjective. It's a matter of opinion.
I think it's case by case. If they want to bring it to court, you know, let them. And in
the case of the stepkids, that's a totally different thing as well.
In the case of stepkids, step-parents, I mean, I think it's all based on circumstance. Of course, if biological parents are present, yes, they make the decisions. But what if, for example, an emergency situation happens and you have the step-parent is the only person available? Like, what if it's a medical emergency? You know, because it's usually like the parents or next of kin or spouse that can make the decision. You know, sometimes doctors won't make a move unless they get, you know, the spouse or the parents, you know, permission. So, like, what about in that case? Or in a power of attorney case?
I think it would have to be something that was drawn up beforehand.
Yeah.
But I'm even talking about after. So when they get divorced, if they would have a right to visitation or, you know, things like that. But even during the time, because really, what is a step parent? It's just somebody that your mother or father met and decide to fucking marry. I mean, there's differences because there's people that have been around since they were little kids.
Yeah.
But usually in those cases, they get adopted. So that's what I was saying. If they're legally adopted, then that changes the whole thing.
Well, no, I mean, it's not just that, you know, when they're legally adopted. What if, you know, you have a couple, they were never married and they had a child and then they weren't together and one of the parents, you know, gets married. And then that spouse knows the child since they were little, and then older, that couple gets divorced. I don't think they have rights. I don't agree that they have rights to see the child, like visitation rights. But I think if they've done nothing to bring harm to the child, you know, I think that they should still be able to, you know, be involved with the parents' permission.
Yeah, but it'd have to be with the parents' permission.
Yeah,
and
with the parents' permission.
Again, I think if they were legally adopted, obviously, then they would be the parent.
Well, obviously, yeah, if they were the legal guardian or...
So it wouldn't matter if they got divorced and they had legally adopted. And there's many people that, you know, the step parents have been around since they were little kids and they pretty much raised them. So in that case, they're like, they would consider them their dad or mom, and that's fine. And if they would have got divorced,
like, can you sue? Like, let's say that happens. You raise this child, you know, the one parent that's the biological parent but has never been involved, but the step parent, yeah, and then they try to take all the rights that, you know, that they have. Could that step parent sue?
I mean, you could sue for anything basically, but I think that in order to adopt the kid, you might need the parents' permission. However, if they're not involved in their life at all and they pretty much just disappeared and said they don't want anything to do with it, then in cases like that, you might not need the parents' permission, and they could go and sue, but I don't think they'd really get anywhere. It all depends, you know, and it depends on the state and it depends on the judge. I mean, the what I call the injustice system is really fucked up, and family courts are just as fucked up as criminal courts. So, you know, they're all corrupt and whatever. So you never know. That's why the law is so fucked up too, because they could have made everything nice and clear and spelled out every law specifically, but they leave them so open-ended that they're open to interpretation, and you never know. One judge could say one thing and another judge could say something totally different, and it's crazy. So, well, that's all the time we have for tonight. Katie, unless you anything you want to add before we go or mention or...
No, I'm good.
Well, thank you, of course, for joining us and coming on the show tonight. I had fun, and I definitely think it was a good show because you came on it. And thanks, everybody out there, for listening. I appreciate it as always. Check us out at nonpartisanlibertyforall.com. And if you want to listen to any of the archives that we've ever done, you could go to Spreaker.com. Also, check us out on YouTube, because we do make, I think I've made 10 cents so far off of people watching the video. So there's no video right now. There's just a picture. In the future, though, I need to save up some more money, but I do plan on, depending on how things go, on possibly doing YouTube broadcasts where the broadcast will be live from the studio along with the Spreaker broadcast. So I don't know when. It might be a while, but that is a goal of mine. So what I'd have to do is get, 3 or 4 different webcam cameras, because you wouldn't want to just look at one view of me. That would be kind of boring. But to kind of flip around the room while we're on the air and look at the equipment and different things, and maybe even have some of the animals in the room at times as well. I know people love pets, so that might be interesting also. So everybody have a good weekend, and we will see you on Tuesday. Thanks, everybody.
We will defend these police officers.
Listen to police officers' commands, listen to what we tell you, and just stop. The nation needs to realize that when we tell you to do something, do it. And if you're wrong, you're wrong. If you're right, then the courts will figure it out.
We don't get to take the law, we enforce it. But at the end of the day, each and every member should go home safe. Sometimes the use of force is necessary. You need to comply with the police officer the way the system was meant to be. Comply with the orders of police officers. Resisting arrest is a real and dangerous crime. We will defend these police officers.
Listen to police officers' commands, listen to what we tell you, and just stop. The nation needs to realize that when we tell you to do something, do it. And if you're wrong, you're wrong. If you're right, then the courts will figure it out.
We don't get to take the law, we enforce it. But at the end of the day, each and every member should go home safe. Sometimes the use of force is necessary. You need to comply with the police officer the way the system was meant to be. Comply with the orders of police officers. Resisting arrest is a real and dangerous crime.
Nonpartisan Liberty for All. I'm your host, Dave Bourne, and it is April 28th, 2016, and we are coming to you live from Las Vegas, Nevada. Thank you for tuning in to Nonpartisan Liberty for All. We're on weeknights, Tuesday through Thursday at 7 o'clock Pacific, 10 o'clock Eastern. And you can listen live on Spreaker.com and NonpartisanLibertyForAll.com and to the archives immediately following the show on Spreaker, YouTube, Twitter, Tumblr, and SoundCloud, as well as by the next day on Stitcher. On Nonpartisan Liberty for All, we promote the ideas of true freedom and liberty and self-ownership, meaning being able to do whatever you want as long as you respect the freedom of others and don't directly interfere with their freedom. Exposing government for what it is, a mafia based on extortion that rules without consent by threat of force and violence. And if that's the first time for you hearing that, of course, you might be somebody who is in total denial or thinks it's a bunch of bullshit. But the truth is, it is the reality. Look up extortion in the dictionary and try not paying your property taxes, and you'll see what happens real quick. We're happy to hear from you, and you can reach us via phone at 702-470-7664. That's 702-470-7664. Or via Skype. Our Skype name is Nonpartisan Liberty for All. It's all one word. And you can find all that information and check us out at nonpartisanlibertyforall.com, which also links to our Facebook pages and other social media info, as well as contact information, archives, original articles, and more. And tonight, we again have a special co-host, Katie Reyes, who is also our voiceover girl, is joining us again tonight.
Hello, everyone.
Thank you, Katie, for joining us. Of course, it's a pleasure to have you in the studio.
Thank you for having me.
So tonight we're going to talk all about traditional families and the interference of the government in the destruction of traditional families in certain ways, along with other things related to families in general. There are, of course, now so many different types of families, and personally I don't judge anybody regardless of how their family is structured. All world's jail population, because there's just a jail culture. How many times have you heard somebody say, oh, they should go to jail, or we need a law for this, or all that ridiculous shit. So we'll get to that when we get to that point about single parents. But I first want to talk about traditional families, meaning I would consider, well, first of all, what would you consider a traditional family? What would be your definition of a traditional family?
I suppose my definition of a traditional family would be a man and a woman who first get married, then have children, It really doesn't matter whether, both parents work or one parent works, as long as they are together. I guess it doesn't even matter if the parents are married, just as long as they're together and committed and somehow both contribute to the household, whether that be both of them work and both of them cook and clean or do some kind of repairs or contribute in some way, or one parent works, one parent stays home, but they somehow manage to both maintain the household. I guess my sense of a traditional family, as long as the couple is together and holding the household together.
See, I would also, I would see a traditional family also as a family that had one parent that stayed home. And this is what I believe, and then I want to hear your thoughts on this. But I think that no matter what, that there should be one parent that stays home. Now, I don't necessarily, when people think of traditional families like from the 50s and shit, they think of the woman stays home and watches the kids and cook, and the guy goes to work and pays the bills and that whole thing. And I believe in those roles, to be honest, and I'm more of, in general, I would say that depending on who makes more money would be the person to stay home. But I do kind of believe in for myself personally, not for, again, whatever other people want to do is what they want to do. But I wouldn't have a problem staying home as long as my wife made more money. But I still kind of believe, I guess, in those more traditional, the wife is the one who, if you have kids, now if you don't have kids, it's a whole nother story. But if you have kids, that the woman stays home and takes care of the kids and takes care of the house and all of that. Now, if she has a career that's more, that pays more and is more important than the man's career, and personally, I wouldn't have a problem with that neither. If I stayed home and say we had kids and we're married, and you had a, say you were a doctor and you made a lot of money, and that would be a bad job though, because you'd probably never be home. But point being that I think when it comes to any type of family, that there should be one parent that's home until at least the kids are old enough to stay home by themselves, like teenage years. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, to the doctor.
And the wedding is on. He wants to frame the 77 compatible certificate that we got, Chelsea said. Some of the DNA testing sites offer dating services to find and set you up with your supposed perfect match. Like I was saying at the beginning, prices for DNA couples analysis start at about $149. What people will do for money, or what people will do to start a business for money. So they're really saying that by testing your DNA, so they can get that from your saliva, that they can predict compatibility, whether you'd be compatible with somebody. So what if we got a DNA test for compatibility and it came back that we're not compatible? Would you give what would be your thoughts? Would you even have a second thought or give any validity to that test? I mean, this is a short article. It doesn't go into the details, but yes, I guess from your DNA, there's certain things that they can get, but at the same time, it's the nature versus nurture argument, where your environment, also the way you're brought up, the people you're around, that combined with your DNA is what makes you into the person you are. And DNA doesn't speak for chemistry that you may have with somebody. So you would just not really give it any thought if
I don't know. Why don't we do one and we'll see. I'll be able to tell you.
Well, I honestly think it's $150. I honestly think that to be honest, it may be a front for the fucking CIA because they have a lot of front companies, and I'm not kidding. They're starting to collect DNA from people now. There's a DNA database. For certain felonies, they can do it. The police do it all the time now. And the Supreme Court even ruled for certain misdemeanors, they can take your DNA, put it in a DNA database, and then use it where if they find your DNA at a crime scene, they run it through a computer and see if it comes up. And that's some scary shit.
But, okay, if that's the case, is this a private company? Because don't they have a right to protect their clients? And wouldn't anyone who would have this test done, read into that? What is my DNA going to be further used for? I mean, you'd have to be an idiot to agree to this if there wasn't some kind of privacy protection.
There is, but there is with a lot of things, and they violate it because the government gets a court order or their CIA fronts. I mean, you know how essentially the government can do whatever the fuck they want to do, and that's just bottom line. So if the government wanted to get the DNA of all these samples, I'm sure they could. Now, I don't know that that's the case. I'm just speculating, but it wouldn't surprise me. We'll just put it that way. But anyway, I thought that was just an interesting little article. So I wanted to look at that. There was one other article that I wanted to mention, and we can go into detail later in the show about it, is that 5 million kids have parents that are incarcerated, that are in jail, which is a lot of kids. Now, of course, the United States has the highest prison population in the world. I believe the United States makes up 5% of the world's population and 25% of although I believe more in traditional. We're also going to talk about gender roles within the family. And I believe in freedom to do what you want personally. And that means being that you have the freedom to do whatever you want and the government should not interfere. And I don't really judge anybody for what they do. It's their life. It's their right to do it. But when it comes to my own life, and this is, I guess, kind of my precursor to all this, that I believe more in traditional gender roles within the family, and I believe more in a traditional type family to an extent. I guess it depends on how you look at it. So I'd say more in the gender roles as opposed to a traditional family, because we talked about last week all about raising kids and my thoughts on that, where I believe in giving kids freedom. And I don't think that would be considered traditional at all. But when it comes to things like relationships, marriage, and things like that, I think I'm more traditional, as well as gender roles. But again, when it comes to other people's lives, I believe that it's their right to live their lives how they choose. And I don't believe in any mandates of the government. As I said, it's all up to the individual. And if you don't believe in the gender roles or how I believe when it comes to the family, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. I think that you should be able to choose your own life because it is your life. And I wouldn't want somebody to live a certain life, which has happened throughout the years, especially with gay people, where they've gotten married to women, speaking of guys, and they did it because of their parents or pressure by society. And that not only hurts them, it hurts the women they marry, the children, and it's just bad all around. So I'd rather somebody just be who they are, and I have no problem with that whatsoever. So when we're talking about a lot of the different subjects today, a lot of them, there's the difference that I want people to recognize. There's a difference between an opinion of how I look at my personal life and how I want to live it, and then the right for other people to choose their life and respecting the way they live their life as long as it doesn't directly affect me, meaning, you know, they don't attack me or force things on my family or anything like that. Of course, the people that force laws upon me by the threat of force and guns are the people that bother me. So before we get to talking about traditional families and gender roles, there are two articles I came across, and I think, Katie, these will be interesting to you. And for those who don't know, Katie and I are a couple. A couple of what? I have no idea. But there was a article regarding DNA and couple compatibility, and this is really the one I wanted to talk about. The other one actually has to do with families. But there was an article I came across that claims that they can determine compatibility via DNA. So what are your thoughts about that, Katie? And what would be, if we had a test, let's assume that there's some validity to this. Now, how you can prove it, I don't know, because you really can't. Even if people were together their whole lives, you can't really prove it. I mean, maybe they just get along. Maybe there's no in love there. Maybe, I don't know. But they say, I guess, compatibility. You know, what that exactly means, I guess, is up for debate. But what do you think of that? And do you think that's possible? And what would you do, or what would you think if it came out that we were not compatible via DNA?
Well, do they mean compatible via DNA, meaning, for example, if we would have healthy children or not? Because I know a lot of people have like genetic histories of illnesses, or, you know, if they take the DNA from two adults, and it would most likely that their child would have some kind of like syndrome or disease or some kind of condition. Like, I've heard of that. I've heard of like married couples, they go and they get tested to see if they're, I guess, in a sense, compatible to have children.
No, this has nothing to do with that. It's if you're compatible with that person. So it's a pretty short article. Let me read the article for everybody, because it is pretty short. So when it comes to this is from CBS New York. When it comes to relationships, there's no perfect formula to tell if that certain someone is Mr. or Mrs. Right until now. There may be some real science behind the chemistry of love with DNA matchmaking. And I could just see this becoming like a business where people go in and they give their DNA like morons. And then, of course, it goes to the government. And then they match them with somebody else by DNA. And I would see it as a CIA front, really, just to collect people's DNA. But there might be some real science behind the chemistry of love with DNA matchmaking. CBS 2's Christine Johnson spoke to two couples, one who has been together happily for decades and another newly engaged couple. We knew fairly early we had something special, Chelsea Furringer said. Chelsea and Brian Hudson were introduced through friends. Max and Donna I can't pronounce last names for shit, I guess, met in high school and married 7 years later. It was 32 years in July for the couple. What makes these couples work and what makes any couple work? There may be a scientific answer. DNA testing companies claim they can tell how compatible you are with your mate. It's as simple as putting some saliva into a test tube and sending it to be analyzed. That's just how they test DNA. If it comes back as incompatible, the wedding's off, Brian joked. It's not funny. He's kidding, of course, but that little bit of spit holds a ton of information. The test can measure things like serotonin, dopamine, and oxytocin. They can be indicators of how you might react to emotional situations, if you're impulsive, and your ability to deal with stress. Some experts say that it's still the basic romantic connection that makes couples work, and I would probably agree more with that. A lot of people have to have common interests. You have to have compatibility in your personality, so I guess it goes much more than DNA testing, Jeanette Fraser said. In these cases, though, the results brought good news for the couples. That's probably why we've been together for so long, Donna Future said. And for Chelsea and Brian,